Colleagues, okay. Good evening, colleagues. We will be going live in literally seconds. So can I remind everybody to mute yourselves, please? Good evening and welcome welcome you all to this virtual meeting of Newcastle City Council's full meeting. All members joining me today and everyone watching at home on YouTube, welcome this evening. I am Councillor Rahman, the Sheriff and Deputy Lord Mayor of Newcastle. Members will be aware this is the first time that I have chaired a meeting of City Council. Thanks to Lord Mayor David Cook finally deciding to take a much-deserved short break, and we await his return back to the chair. This is still a very different a new way of meeting for most of us, but it is clearly necessary due to the coronavirus pandemic, which has impacted on all of our lives. However, it is right that the council gets together by whatever means it can to ensure priority business can be dealt with. The new virtual way of working has been a steep learning curve for us all. And I'd like to ask members to bear with me and the IT system as we learn to chair the second remote meeting of full council in this virtual world. Agenda item 1, apologies. John?
Thank you, Chair. We've had apologies from Councillors Cook and Jackie Robinson.
Are there any more apologies?
Can I apologise for Councillor Walker, who hopes to join us late but is stuck at work at the moment?
Thank you. That's noted.
Chair, can I apologise for Councillor Sharon Pattison?
Thank you. That's noted.
Could I also apologise for Councillor Brian Hunter?
Thank you. That's also noted. Are there any more apologies? No, thank you. We will move on. Agenda item 2, minutes. Item 2A, does council agree the minutes of a previous meeting held on the 24th of June 2020?
Agreed.
Thank you.
Agreed.
Thank you. Item 2B, due to a clerical error, the wrong version of the amendment to minute number 64 of the 6th November 2019 was included in the draft minutes and subsequently agreed by council on 8th January 2020. The correct minute is reproduced as item 2A in the agenda pack for this meeting. Does council agree to the correction?
Agreed.
Thank you. Agenda item 3, official announcement. We have no official announcement this evening. Agenda item number 4, correspondence. Does council agree to receive the correspondence from the Minister for Regional Growth and Local Government?
Agreed.
Thank you. Agenda item 5, petitions. There are no petitions. There are no petitions submitted this month. Item number 6, public questions and address. One request to address council was received this month, but unfortunately the questioner can no longer join us. A written response will be provided. Agenda item number 7, presentation from Police, Crime Commissioner and Chief Constable of Northumbria Police. Can I invite Winton Keenan and Kim McGuinness to speak to council? Members will ask questions following the presentation, and may I ask that all replies be given together at the end. Chief Constable and Police Crime Commissioner, if you're ready to proceed.
We are.
Over to you.
Hello everybody. Hopefully it's okay that I go first. I think it says that Winton will go first, but if I don't go first, you'll steal all the time, so I have to do that. But thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for welcoming me back to council. It's an absolute pleasure. It's a shame that we're not in the council chamber for it. I'm going to give a very quick overview of some of the priorities that I've been working on as Police and Crime Commissioner since my election. And then obviously I would be wrong to go through without talking about COVID. But I want to leave plenty of time for Winton to talk about what his officers have been up to, and also for council to ask questions. So I think it was really key. It was really important to me to hit the ground running as a new Police and Crime Commissioner. And I was very clear about what priorities I'd had when I stood for election. Those were largely around taking a public health approach to tackling crime, to preventing. We hit the ground running with that and established a violence reduction unit for Northumbria by October. That unit is now fully staffed, fully operational, and has a board that sits right across the Northumbria area with representatives, including the Director of Public Health from Newcastle. That partnership approach means that we're working with everybody from councils to housing to hospitals to the police to the fire service, businesses, and the list goes on, to make sure that we're all on the same page with regard to getting in early, making interventions, working with children, families, young people, those who might be experiencing drug and alcohol addiction or issues, homelessness, and dealing with their problems in order to prevent crime. I think year one has been very, very successful. We have seen a reduction in violent crime, which Winton will talk about. It's very difficult always to attribute things directly to a programme like the Violence Reduction Unit, but it's also hard not to imagine that we've put all of that money back into services that have been cut after 10 years of austerity, such as youth services, and not seen a positive outcome. There's also been money into the police force through surge money, which has allowed them to make more focused interventions to support the work of the VRU. We're now launching year two, which focuses mainly on children, young people and families to try and keep that positive trajectory going. And I would like to commend all of the partners, so all of the charities and third sector organisations that we've commissioned who do this fantastic work, for being able to continue it through such a difficult period where everything's had to be done socially distanced. But you know, they've risen to the challenge and they've found ways to really improve lives. And the idea of that is that they will prevent crime through doing that. One of the other things that I talked about massively throughout the campaign, and again we've got on with delivering, has been recruitment. In Northumbria, we've really got cracking with delivering not only on the government's recruitment target, but going above and beyond that, replacing officers who are leaving and retiring, but then also still continuing to increase the number beyond where government wanted us to be and beyond what we needed to replace those leaving and retiring. And again, Winton will talk more about the figures there, but I'm really pleased and really proud of that. And that's continued throughout the COVID period, which I think is fantastic work from the police force, and something that I can only give them great credit for, because they're managing to get new officers trained at home, in a combination of a socially distanced classroom environment at home, and then obviously where it's not avoidable, having the close contact. And I think it's really excellent. We talked about hate crime and tackling hate crime in the region. Again, I know Winton's going to touch on this, particularly with the Newcastle context, but we're up and running with hate crime accreditation scheme across local businesses and organisations in the area, working with Citizens UK to keep on moving and making sure that we're making an impact on that. And of course, none of the fantastic work that Vera spearheaded on with domestic and sexual violence has stopped. We'll continue with that as well. Moving on to COVID. Now, nobody expected this, and it has been a really, really difficult period of time. And as I've said, none of what I set out to try and achieve, including things like the VRU, have dropped off. We've kept on going with that. But of course, it's been really important to respond to the crisis and to support our communities. So we obviously established a coronavirus response fund, which a lot of organisations in Newcastle applied to and were successful in achieving. And that was all around supporting our third sector partners to get through COVID, but also making sure that they were able to deliver their services and help people at a really difficult time, whether that be through supporting them if they're lonely or vulnerable, whether it be delivering youth services, whether it be enabling them with technology. And that has all been really, really fantastically well received, and I'm really pleased to see some of what's been going on there. As well as that, we've spent money to support young people who experience domestic abuse in the home, and also the victims of domestic abuse or those who are at risk. This is one of the things that we've been really concerned about throughout the COVID period. Obviously, crime in general has dropped throughout COVID. There have been less opportunistic crimes, there's been less violent crime, but when you talk about domestic abuse, it happens behind closed doors, it's indiscriminate, and it's something that's been hidden away. And at the beginning, we saw really concerning numbers where we actually saw domestic abuse reporting drop, which, you know, you'd say, well, falling crime, that's a good thing, but actually what that means is it's happening in a way that we don't know where it is, we're not able to find it, nobody's able to report it. So we worked with the sector across the region to create a campaign which was all around third-party reporting. If you know that there's somebody struggling in your street, if you're spotting the signs, then make sure that you report. And that's been, again, well received, and we continue to work right across the board with particularly the women and girls sector, but the domestic and sexual violence sector, to try and keep that work going, because certainly I've never seen such a focus in mainstream media on domestic abuse as I have during COVID, and we need to make sure that in order to tackle this long-standing crime, we keep doing that. Again, when we think about COVID, we're now starting to think about recovery, and I know that there's some fantastic work going on across the region in terms of economic recovery. I think the work that's happening through Newcastle Council is absolutely brilliant. But what I'm urging is that we focus on not just economic, but also social recovery together. I'm very conscious about the impact, particularly on young people, of this pandemic. I'm very conscious of the impact of lockdown. And I'm very concerned that now that we're in a recession, what we'll start to see is rising unemployment, a lack of jobs and opportunity, young people who've been negatively affected by a pandemic, and rising crime. And I'm worried that when we start to think about the long-term funding settlement from the government, that we might see more cuts. And so part of the work I'm doing at the moment is trying to keep a focus on saying this would be the worst possible time to cut those services, because they're needed now more than ever. And as a region, we have to come together and work as councils, as you know, with the mayor, with the Office of Police and Crime Commissioner, our emergency services, to be able to keep the focus on social and economic recovery.
Sorry, Kim, just to remind you, you've had 7 minutes and you've got 10 minutes between both of them.
Oh dear, I never did get any better at this. So yeah, as you'll know, the way I like to do the job is to be out and about. That's been more difficult, but we're getting there. And I'll talk more about that throughout the questions, I'm sure. So I'll hand over to Winton. I'm sorry, Winton.
No, it's all right, gentlemen. I will try and shoehorn this in. So here we go. COVID's in unpleasant times for us all. The positivity from that, without any contact, is that we've been able to get our in the workplace. I think probably somebody may not be on mute, Deputy Mayor, which might be giving some feedback. Anyway, so cutting that right down to where it is, we've been able to make pretty much business as usual with the number of officers we have in the workplace, which has been really positive for everybody. I'm going to come on to officer uplift now. This is something that's been talked about very much. Very quickly, we have all heard the government announcements about the uplift in police officers. That means for Northumbria Police, by the end of this year, we'll have an additional 123 officers. Next year, we hope to recruit an additional 246. Then the final year of that uplift programme, a further 185. Those of you very good at maths recognise 554 additional officers for Northumbria. Obviously very positive. We'll make the best use of those officers. But a little bit of caveat to us all, as with so much in life. Of course, that doesn't go towards replacing what we've already lost. During austerity, we lost over 1,000 officers and a similar number of police staff. But it's really positive news to get us back to some realistic numbers that can represent us across our region. Very quickly, because of time, I'll talk about crime recording in a very condensed way. Commissioner's already mentioned significant reductions in criminality over the previous 12 months, 10% across the force. Most importantly for Newcastle, that does see a significant reduction in criminality being reported in Newcastle. It's actually a 16% reduction in your local authority area, which realistically for you all means a reduction of 6,669 victims, which is really positive stuff. And that's a reduction in all crime types. You are the only local authority area to see a reduction in all crime types, including a reduction in hate crime. However, you'll be seeing there are increases in hate crime. It's still an underreported matter. We are seeing increased reporting in LGBT, particularly around homophobia and transphobic. and also in disability. That positively coincides with some focused engagement campaign we've had ongoing. However, we can't put necessarily all down to that, but there are some benefits to increased reporting and confidence, and also better identification in-house. Particularly with regard to the other matters, I recognise we've got 2 minutes left, so I'm just going to close by saying, look, it's a positive position at the moment for Newcastle. However, we don't know what the new norm is going to be as to our criminal profile, antisocial behaviour profile, because we're still suffering COVID. So I'll just end by saying, look, Northumbria Police really is, I think, has become even more integrated across our communities because of COVID. That means that we've been able to adopt our neighbourhood, our community engagement approach very deliberately, which sees Northumbria Police, a bit of positivity for everybody. We are ranked #1 by the public, the confidence our public have in us as a local police force against all the other 43 forces. Of course, there's more to do, as we need to ensure that we're allowed to allow individuals to go about the way they want to, and also allow business to flourish in the fine city we have. But I assure you of Northumbria's commitment to taking its part and making sure that can be the case. And hopefully that's 3 minutes.
It was well done. Thank you very much, Chief Constable and PCC. We will go to questions. Can I remind Council, when called on, please be precise and stick to questions. Can I call on Councillor Kilgour first, please? If you want to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Deputy Lord Mayor. Thank you very much for those presentations. I just wanted to ask about some of our adult safeguarding work. Kim and I met with officers earlier in the year to discuss support for victims of sexual exploitation and modern day slavery. And as you'll know, the multi-agency safeguarding hub is now up and running and is receiving quite a high number of safeguarding adults alerts. So I wondered if you could say something, please, about the success of these joint initiatives and also the importance of partnership working.
Thank you, Councillor Kilgour. The PCC and Chief Constable will respond once they've taken all the questions. So can I call on Councillor Hoddart, please?
Thank you, Sheriff. I read that lots of crime dropped during the lockdown period because more people were at home. But locally, we've been picking up on some of the local chat lines and Facebook pages that there's been a bit of a surge in either attempts or actual car crime, people stealing cars or stealing things from cars. Do you have any evidence of this? Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Can I call on Councillor Barnes, please?
Yeah, thank you, Deputy Lord Mayor. Just a quick one from me. One of the things that I've been particularly concerned about during lockdown is the impact that COVID will have had on young people who haven't been able to access youth services and school. I know this is something that the Commissioner already touched on really briefly in her speech, but I'd just like to ask if she could tell us a little bit more about what the impact has been and what can be done to address this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Phil Hall, please.
Thank you, Sheriff. Given the unique and historic moment that the world is witnessing with the protests against institutional racism, could the Commissioner lay out some of the steps that the police force will be taking to check and ensure healthy relations and interactions between the police and the diverse communities in the region? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can I call on Councillor Ali, Iram Ali?
Thank you, Deputy Lord Mayor. Hi, Kim and Winton. Really good to see you on screen tonight. Thank you for your presentation. I was going to ask a little bit more about your public health approach to crime and policing. I just want to know more about what that means and what progress you're making. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ali. Can I call on Nick Cott, Councillor Cott, please?
Thank you very much, Sheriff. My question is about the late night levy. What has it been used for whilst the city has been on lockdown? And if it hasn't been used, what plans do you have to use it? Thank you.
Thank you. Can I call on Councillor Woodwark, please? Tom Woodwark.
Thank you, Sheriff. Yeah, it's just a case of there's been, as Commissioner McGuinness knows, about attacks on all 3 uniformed services that we have. The report today about there being a 90% declaration rate of assaults on police officers over the time frame. The recent attacks on paramedics, and I know she was involved as a member of the Fire Authority, pointing out the attacks that have been on firefighters. And it was just to reinforce, I guess, to reinforce really about there has to be a change in attitude by those minorities who, quite frankly, are coming out with doing mindless actions. And there's no excuse for that, and that it does have to stop.
Thank you. Can I call on Councillor Lovatt, please?
Thank you, Sheriff. My question's about Operation Mondero and the impact that might be having on the reduction of speeding drivers in Northumbria. We have noticed that a number of road users have, during lockdown, appeared to be exceeding the speed limit, and has Operation Mondero had an impact on that so far?
Thank you. And Councillor Hobson, please.
Thank you, Deputy Lord Mayor. My question to Kim, thank you very much for your presentation, by the way. It was very good to hear. Okay, my question is about the role of the Police and Crime Commissioner specifically, and obviously you don't need me to tell you about the lack of diversity you have amongst the Police and Crime Commissioners across the country. And I was just wondering what you've been doing in your role to promote the role of the Police and Crime Commissioner, but also to maybe tackle that lack of diversity amongst the elected representatives that we have.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Gareth Kane, please.
Yes, thank you, Sheriff. My question is, Ousbourne Ward has got a strong reputation as being having a good social element, particularly at night. But during the lockdown, we were plagued with parties in the parks, with sound systems. We had people drinking in pubs that had closed. They were drinking in their beer gardens, whatnot. And obviously, during the pandemic, that was a very serious health risk. And I was wondering, in case there's a local lockdown or a return to a national lockdown in Newcastle, what the plans were to deal with those kinds of gatherings.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Christine Morrissey, please.
Thank you very much. It was very pleasing to hear Kim say that children and young people are one of her priorities. So that's a good start to this. Earlier in the summer, the United Nations described the worldwide increase in domestic abuse as a shadow pandemic alongside COVID-19. And one of the Home Affairs Select Committees said if urgent steps are not taken to deal with increasing levels of domestic abuse, we'll face serious consequences for a generation. So my question is this: now that children and young people are returning to school, staff, as part of this third-party reporting, as Kim said, are preparing for an increase in disclosures of domestic abuse. And what plans do Northumbria Police and partners have in place to ensure this rise in domestic abuse reporting means that children and parents will be safe, and what contingency measures are in place to monitor the situation should Newcastle need to go back into lockdown in the future?
Thank you very much, Councillor. That concludes the numbers of questions. So if I could request the PCC and Chief Constable to respond to some of those questions, please.
Brilliant. Thank you. Some great questions as ever. So what I'll do is I'll canter through them and hand over to Winton when necessary. So first of all, Councillor Kilgour, adult safeguarding and the multi-agency hub, which is absolutely fantastic. I must say it's absolutely brilliant. I have visited and the work it's doing is brilliant. That partnership approach is absolutely vital to this work, because the way that hub has enabled victims to have a trusted, safe space to work in, while the police and other services are all in one place, so that they don't have to be continually referred around the doors, for want of a more professional terminology, is just absolutely brilliant. And of course, I'm sure Winter will talk a bit more about this, but the same sort of approach is now being used for more things, including child criminal exploitation, and tackling that sort of thing as well. So I don't know if there's anything you want to talk about on that.
Just to say, you know, whilst these things have been ever present, there's still an awful lot of emerging issues around, you know, sexual exploitation, trafficking, and we work very closely with our regional partners, which is called NERSU, the North East Regional Special Operations Unit, where we do very dedicated operations towards them. That's taken beyond the MASH in actual fact. The one thing I say that the question was asked was, you know, how important is that partnership working? It's essential. The MASH is a real success story. But in order to play our part in policing, which I'm probably talked to most directly, in order to make sure the service we offer is actually enhanced beyond what it even was during the times of, you'll heard of Operation Sanctuary, we've actually aligned our safeguarding department together with our crime department. So we have a synergy of those investigators who are actually better equipped and better skilled to deal with those really complex investigations, so that we actually have a far more direct, deliberate approach towards the investigators who are the most skilled, most specialised to deal with that activity. So we're continuing to evolve all the time to make sure that partnership work is built upon.
Councillor Hudder, I'm going to pass your question about attempts or actual car crime over to the Chief.
Yeah, the reality is that when we had less people on the street, understandably, that was two things. The first thing was that there were less people going out and about who were criminals, but it was much easier to identify those people who were out and about for nefarious means. So actually we were able to suppress an awful lot of activity much more directly during COVID, being very open with you. The reality is that since we've come out of COVID, there is far more access now, people being back at work, people are using public transport, so vehicles are sometimes left at home addresses and left in the streets. The reality is, though, it's probably fairly anecdotal at the moment with regard to some things you're hearing, because we are still experiencing a reduction in vehicle crime, actually to the extent of 15%. Now, that's easy for me to say, and there may well be local examples of it, but we haven't seen that return spike to criminality in any regard, and certainly not towards vehicle crime at this moment in time.
Okay, Councillor Barnes, the impact of young people and the lack of youth services in school. Honestly, I could talk about this all day. I think it's the thing that has occupied my thoughts as more than anything during the crisis. It's something that gives me sleepless nights thinking about the impact on young people, not just young people who've missed out on rites of passage like exams and going to school and leaving school and going off to university in a normal fashion, but actually those children and young people for whom school is an escape from a difficult home environment, and for whom going to a youth club or an activity is something that really is enriching to their lives when they perhaps aren't from when perhaps they've got a chaotic background. And so when you remove all of that stuff, that obviously has such an impact. Recently, the OPCC and the VRU have conducted a youth survey, and one of the big things that's come back from young people, and there was a huge number of respondents, was the impact on their mental health. And so, of course, that's something that we will work with partners to push out, to say, look, this is what young people are proactively telling us is an issue for them. I think the other thing is, again, as I said in my opening, about the restoration of youth services. Between 2010 and the present day, we saw in some parts of our region, not Newcastle, I may add, but up to 90% cut in youth services, but certainly a cut in youth services right across the board. And of course, that has a hugely negative impact on young people. And we've worked to try and commission new youth services in the area, right from kind of the walk-in activities like boxing clubs and football clubs and that kind of thing, through to those who need a bit more mentoring and a bit of guidance from trusted adults, right through to interventions for young people who are right on the edge of criminality and in danger of getting into the very difficult stuff and ending up in a life of crime. And I'm desperate to make sure that that continues, because I do genuinely believe it's the way forward. The only way to stop stop that continued impact is to continue to invest in young people. And so that's certainly what we're doing. I think we need to monitor carefully what happens when children go back to school. And I guess I'm probably vying into an answer to Councillor Morrissey's question. We will see more issues emerging. We likely will see more disclosures around domestic abuse. And so all of those things are impacts on young people, and it's something that we've all got to work to tackle. Is there anything you want to add on that one? No, lovely. Councillor Hall, institutional racism, the steps that the force will be taking to work with diverse communities. I mean, it has been a real point in history where we've rightly been forced to address issues around institutional racism, and it's something that we all have to take some responsibility for. I won't speak on behalf of the force. I know you directed the question at me, but I think it's right that the chief answers about what the force are doing to garner relationships and communities.
Yeah, and you know, I'd certainly offer to anybody who would want more information on this to certainly come back to us. Look, there are many things important in policing. The reality is that there's nothing more important. The things equally as important, I'm guessing, there's nothing more important than legitimacy. Legitimacy starts with being representative of the communities that you serve. And I'll be honest with you, we find that incredibly difficult. You know, we're on a journey with that, and there's much more to do, and we find it very difficult to become a truly attractive employer, and I'm very open about that. But what we have done is a number of things. When I look towards the starting point for that being representative, we now have an inclusion hub in North Thurley Police, which comprises of a positive action team, which is there to drive up the attraction, the recruitment, and then the retention of members from Black, Asian, minority ethnic groups. And running alongside the positive action team in the inclusion hub is our inclusion officers, and we have a number of police staff members who are looking towards how we can look towards becoming more truly diverse, but particularly inclusive in the organisation, everything we do. Because, of course, we are an organisation that has history to it and is very male-dominated from many years ago. So we're doing an awful lot inside the God of unconscious bias training, looking towards ambassadors, looking towards support networks inside the organisation, as well as putting people on programmes very deliberately focused who they are when they apply to become an officer, or making it attractive for people to want to become an officer. Then when we look towards the use of powers, which is something that, of course, demonstrates, in reality, potential unconscious bias in policing, but also potentially unconscious bias very much in society as a whole. Because when police attend those issues and incidents they're directed towards. So what we have done with regard to the use of powers, so the likes of stop and search and use of force, handcuffing and the like, then we have independent scrutiny panels that we subject all of our stop and search to, and all of our use of force towards. There are a number of groups, and they include, by way of example, a youth group comprising of members, solely members from Black, Asian and minority ethnic groups. And we have reports coming to the executive team. So there are many different strands, both to who we are as an organisation and how we go about delivering our powers. And I'm very happy to share more about it, because we're actually quite proud of some things we're doing, but recognising we have a long way to go, as indeed many others do.
And it's something, you know, that we talk about this all the time, because there is a recognition here. You know, my job is to hold the force to account, and there is a recognition here that it isn't always good enough, you know, and there are steps being taken and it's getting better. But in the same way as it is in councils, we've all got ever such a lot to do. And I think there's a real passion to do it here, which is really good.
And I guess the one thing I'd finish there without taking this answer on too long, but by way of example, when we look towards just 18 months ago, you know, once I talk about percentages, since that positive action team came into being, we've increased our representation by way of recruiting Black, Asian, minority ethnic officers to the tune of 38%. Now, there's small numbers, but that's still very nearly a doubling of the representation we have in the workforce. And we'll see that continuing through the Uplift programme, which we're seeking to use as a very deliberate means and trigger towards increasing diversity across the force.
Councillor Ali, first of all, congratulations on your appointment to the Cabinet. It's fantastic news, and I know you'll do a fantastic job. And actually, that leads me nicely into answering your question about what a public health approach is and how we're progressing that. I first came across a public health approach when I was a Cabinet member in Newcastle doing the public health brief. And frankly, it means that here we are now committing as a region to treating violence as a disease, to understanding its symptoms to knowing how it transmits from person to person and taking the measures to prevent it and to treat it. Now, that analogy felt so much more natural and comfortable before we hit a global pandemic, but the method still stands, that this is about identifying who is at risk, getting in there early, working with them to prevent them from coming into contact with those who they might catch this from, and therefore stopping them from getting into a life of crime. And that's the whole ethos behind the Violence Reduction Unit, working with children and families, identifying who's at risk, having a problem profile that spans our region that says, you know, who is it that we need to be targeting and how do we get in there to work with them. And when I say we, I mean that huge broad partnership, as I said, from schools, charities, the police, the fire service, our local authorities. You know, the list goes on, because we have to identify all of the touch points where we can identify those at risk, and we can prevent them from getting into trouble. And so that's what we're doing. And I've talked a bit about the VRU. It's something I'm incredibly passionate about. I think that that does brilliant work, and I believe that the impact of this focused approach is already reaping rewards in the figures. However, what I can't stress enough is it isn't something that you can fix with a little bit of funding for a year or 2 years. We need a committed approach to this. We need the government to commit to funding it permanently. And I think that we know that if we can take this approach across the board for 5 years, 10 years, make it the way we work in the region, then we will see real reward. I think I caveat all of this by saying we've already heard about our crime figures. Northumbria is a very, very safe place. Newcastle is a very, very safe place. And so our focus with our VRU and our approach to this is about keeping it that way. Is there anything you'd like to add on that?
I think that's the time.
Lovely. Councillor Cott, you've asked about the late night levy. Now, I think I'm probably going to have to provide you something in writing. We've talked about this recently because actually we're not entirely clear where we are with the levy in terms of what has been and hasn't been collected. Prior to COVID, obviously, you'll know it was about providing support in the city centre in terms of not just police presence, but in terms of street angels and wardens, people who can provide those who are vulnerable because of their night out in the town with a bit of support. And obviously, there's still a role for some of that even through the COVID period, and particularly in recovery. But it is a little bit of a more complex landscape because of the type of nighttime economy we have at the moment. So we'll come back to you on that with a proper answer. Councillor Woodwark, a tax on the fire, well, you mentioned fire, but the tax on emergency services. I just don't get it. I'm continually shocked and horrified every time I hear about it. Our police force, our emergency services are there to protect us in our times where we most need them. They're there to respond to us. Every single incident where this happens is an insult, not just to the person who has been attacked, but I think to absolutely everybody who might one day need their help. And it can risk them being taken off the street and therefore not responding to someone else. It can risk blood, bits of equipment. One of the things the fire service are talking to me about, and the same with the police, is that if something's damaged, obviously that massively impacts their capacity to be able to respond. And so it is absolutely disgusting. I completely agree with you, something needs to change, and I think we have to look at it in two ways. First of all, we've got to double down on that prevention work. We're hearing a lot of this has been young people perpetrating this sort of crime. We need to double down on the prevention work, but also we do need to look at sentencing. We need to look at sentencing guidelines. We need those guidelines to be issued for the judiciary to be able to issue those sentences. So I think it's a range of things. And then, of course, it's the community education piece, because I genuinely don't think that when you've got young people throwing stuff at the police or at the ambulance service or at firefighters, they are thinking about the impact that could have on loss of life. And so we have to educate people that that is the risk. Anything to add?
No, just we've actually put in place some much more deliberate enhanced support mechanisms for our workforce, right down to me submitting actually some statements to the courts by way of victim personal statements about what it means for a police officer to be assaulted. And that's not just by physical assault, of course, we get officers verbally assaulted. And we are seeing increasing numbers of our more diverse officers coming into the workplace, and of course they are subject to some of the things we see in the open public world as well. So I've also put in a bit of concern about the effect it has when you're racist towards an officer in the same way you're racist towards members of the public.
Yeah, and I think, you know, we've heard today in the news, I don't know if anybody's heard it, but the NPCC did and the staff associations did a big survey, particularly of police, and we're seeing 2/3 of police officers, or might even be 3/4, saying that they want to have access to a taser. We have signed off taser increase in the area. We've applied for money and received that, and so that's something that's also being actioned here as well. Question 8, Councillor Lovatt, Mandero. I don't know about this.
Yeah, and look again, and you, those of you who know me, I'll always be very open about things. I don't think that Mondero is actually seen an impact as yet. I think, of course, it is educating those people to stop, and we've seen a certain amount of publicity and engagement around it. But there is no doubt that during the COVID lockdown, we saw people start to use the roads when they were freer of traffic in ways that were completely unacceptable, which is why we have both a reactive approach to road traffic. We also have a very proactive approach. We have an intelligence-led approach to people who use roads in an anti-social behaviour, and that includes speed. We've had some real successes, and this is one of those occasions where I share with you very directly. Northumbria Police, absolutely, and this is, I have to say, very much under my direction. I make no excuse that Northumbria Police, in the main, will seek to engage, it will seek to explain, it will seek to encourage people towards behaving in an appropriate way against whatever legislation is placed, and then only if it is absolutely appropriate to enforce. However, I'm telling you now, when it comes to motorists using the roads and adopting the speeds they are, then it'll be enforcement all the way through. Because that's the only way we are going to educate people in such ways makes a difference. So I'm afraid I am now at the stage where I'm unapologetic for it. And I wouldn't have said that in my police career, but something has to change. We had 3 fatal road traffic accidents over the weekend. That's 3 people that have been taken away at the end of COVID, despite having survived COVID. It's not acceptable and it's not appropriate. So we'll see more Monderos. And as I say, I make no apology for that.
Councillor Hobson, the role of PCC and the lack of diversity, it isn't very diverse. I'm the only Labour woman. There's a significantly more men doing this role. I don't know whether it appeals more to men naturally or what it is. And there is only one PCC who isn't white. And so that needs to change. I think, what have I been doing to tackle it? Certainly speaking to prospective candidates is something that I'm really proud to do. It's something I did as a councillor. It's something that I'll do as PCC. I think trying to keep the role prominent, people need to, you know, this role has the ability to make change. That's why I wanted to do it. And so by getting out there and talking about what it is that we're doing, consulting people on the issues, you know, we will be more prominent. And I think it needs to be normalised for people to see women in roles like this, particularly. It needs to be normalised for people to see non-white faces in roles like this. And so we need to continue to raise the profile of people doing it. And one of the things that will be happening, and I guess I'm going to use your question as a bit of a plug, Linda, if I'm honest, is that I'll be embarking very shortly on a police and crime plan consultation, and I want that to be the biggest consultation of its kind. I want it to really get into communities and understand what it is that the public want from the police, and how the public want their police force to look, how the public want their police force to prioritise things. And we'll be doing a massive regional tour, and I'll be asking every councillor to push it out to their networks. And again, that's all about people understanding what power they do have to help us to make decisions. And I think that's only a good thing. So I hope that answers your question. Councillor Kane, this is about Usman Ward and basically illegal parties. Yeah, so I'll hand over to Winton to talk about that.
Yeah, the reality is that during COVID, of course, with that, there was a little bit of mixed messaging, wasn't there, came out. So people thought they were free to go and do whatever they wanted, when they probably weren't. The problem is that legislation in some ways didn't keep up with that. So unless we had public space protection orders in place to prevent drinking, then it wasn't actually illegal for people to gather in number. It was just against the guidelines. Guidelines were not able to be legislated towards us. It was a health issue. So we have learned from that, I think, across all the partnership agencies. And what we are doing is we are engaging in order to ensure those preemptive measures by way of the PSPOs are in place in those areas where we are likely to see off-licence sales from on-licensed premises associated with a sunny day. Because the reality is that we know we are driven in this area by demand according to the weather. I would expect to get up to 2,000 calls a day, probably about 2,500 on a New Year's Eve. I was getting 3,500 calls on sunny days at the immediacy of the end of lockdown and COVID. So we have learned from that. We are working with partners together to make sure the orders are in place, and then we use our neighbourhood teams who know the area, who flood the area, who deal with the licensees in order to go through that, engage, explain, educate, and then if people aren't going to abide by what we ask them to do in a very appropriate way, then we will enforce. And so we've learned from how we've had to deal with things and getting ahead of it for should there be a spike moving ahead.
And I think finally, and someone will have to give me a shout if I've missed anybody, it's Councillor Morrissey, and I know I've already touched on the issue of the impact of young people, the impact of COVID on young people, and also domestic abuse. But I think you are right. I think that everybody is expecting a spike in reporting when schools, well, now that schools have returned. And I think on this, it genuinely is a pincer movement. Yeah. Obviously, part of what I do is commission all of the victims' services. So working with the women and girls sector and the domestic abuse sector across the region, everybody is aware and ready and knows that their services need to be prepared for greater demand. And it's something that we continue to check in on them, provide offers of support, make sure that their services are well publicised and keep up that third-party reporting. And then the other thing that we're very proactively doing is, and again, it's a programme I could talk about all day long. We have Operation Encompass Next Steps, which is a programme that sends people into schools to deliver structured lessons at absolutely every age group around domestic abuse and the impacts of it. And that can be right from the very beginning on, on feelings and relationships and friendships and consent, right up to some really hard-hitting stuff when young people get to the ages where they may be in these relationships themselves. And literally the last 2 or 3 weeks, that team's been out there asking to go back into schools or to virtually deliver, and the schools are biting their hands off. So that's fantastic news. And then I'll hand over to the Chief.
I would just say we shouldn't underestimate the value of that programme. It's really good engagement with the schools, as you would expect us to do. We anticipate there'll be a rise in children going to school who we will identify have been involved in abusive contact through the course of during lockdown. We are seeing that slight increases in reporting now lockdown has been eased more fully, although in actual fact quite a lot of the uplift in the domestic abuse figures that we are seeing are born of activity online, and that stalk and harassment type activity and the coercive control actually from remote mechanisms rather than necessarily just in the home. But we are anticipating it. We've also been able to get ahead of a number of things during COVID when we were able to do business in a slightly different way. So our safeguarding teams, as well as our neighbourhood teams, are actually absolutely ready to take this on. My concern in some ways is the capacity of the courts to then deal with some of the prosecuting activity we'll seek to embark upon, because of course there's quite a backlog in the courts. We are working through the local criminal justice board to try and free that up, but I have some concerns we might not be able to put things through as directly as we would want to. We've got a very good join up with the CPS, who are very much meeting us halfway, and that's a true partnership approach to trying to deal with this issue.
I think we've answered all of the questions. I just want to say a huge thank you again for having us this evening, but also for keeping in contact and for making sure that we can hear your issues. Obviously, councillors play such an important role on the ground in understanding what's going on in the communities. And the way that I've approached this role is to be out there with you and understanding what's going on out there, working with organisations who are working with real people, and that's what we'll continue to do. But it's so important that I keep hearing from you. So thank you. And unless we did miss anything, I think that's us.
Thank you very much, Chief Constable Winton Keenan and PCC Kim McGuinness, for attending this council meeting and your presentation and subsequent responses to some of the questions. If anyone wanted to ask a question and you clearly didn't have the opportunity today, do email either the PCC or Chief Constable indeed. Moving on to item 8, question by members. 6 written questions were received this month, and replies have been published on the Council's website, together with other papers for this meeting. Members will receive an email link when the item circulated at the meeting supplement pack was published. Moving on to item 9, Cabinet Member updates. Item 9A, Deputy Leader and Resources. Can I call on Councillor McCarthy to introduce the report?
Thank you very much, Deputy Lord Mayor. I'm really delighted to bring my report to Council this evening. It feels like an eternity ago when we first saw this report. It came to Council in March, Deputy Lord Mayor. And I think we will all feel that the world has changed since then. So actually reading this again, rereading this, many of the items that are included in that have moved on quite significantly through COVID. Chair, the report starts and ends with, so the image on the front is me in Benton Park Primary, where I was delighted to be joined by the French ambassador to launch a programme about languages in schools and language learning in schools. Deputy Lord Mayor, I think that's really important given Brexit is on the horizon. We are still an outward looking city, and I guess I want us to think about that really in terms of our future relationship with colleagues across the Channel. It's been a very challenging few months, Sheriff. Not only am I really proud of what the city has done through COVID, but given that I lead on our work and our relationships with the voluntary and community sector, and I do want to place on record the amazing support we had from all community organisations across the city actually through COVID. They've been fantastic. Maybe just to mention Sally Young and her contribution. Many of us know Sally. She was previously a councillor, but for the last 8 years, she was chief executive of the community and voluntary sector infrastructure organisation in the city, Newcastle CVS. They have changed their name, and some of us will struggle to get used to their new logos. They're now called Connected Voice. But I think, Deputy Lord Mayor, I'd want us as a council to place on our thanks to Sally on record tonight, because she's been an amazing lead for the sector in the city. The response from Connected Voice in coordinating the voluntary and community sector through the pandemic has been astonishing. They brought together organisations to make sure that volunteers were sought, volunteers' help was sought. Again, an amazing response, and right across the city, to be honest. And I think, Sheriff, who would have thought that the focus on digital would have been so important? But we've all learned new ways. You said at the beginning of this meeting how we're learning new ways of working, and I think moving to digital and virtual meetings has been one of those challenges that some of us are still struggling with. I think, Deputy Lord Mayor, I just want to place my thanks to all of the staff who support me in my role. My report is very wide-ranging. Many of those things are way out of date, and I was thinking that I'm probably closer to my next report coming to scrutiny than I am to presenting this report from 6 months ago. But I'm very happy to answer questions. Sheriff, I don't really want to spend time going through an update on things that are there, because we'll see those in the next few months. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. We've got a number of number of people wanted to ask questions. Can I remind those councillors if you could be specific on your questions, and if Councillor McCarthy could take them all at the end, please. Can I call on Councillor Anya Durant first, please?
Thank you, Deputy Lord Mayor, and thank you, Councillor McCarthy, for the report. I've got a couple of questions about the Newcastle Fund. Regarding the grants that are being given to the over 30 community projects, what are our predictions about the social value that these projects are going to generate? and how are residents likely to see this in their day-to-day lives? Additionally, has any of this been changed by the COVID-19 pandemic? And if so, do we have a plan to ensure that the communities still benefit from this fund? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Can I call on Councillor Ashby, please?
Thank you, Lord Mayor, Deputy Sheriff, Deputy Lord Mayor. Not sure which one you would prefer. Thanks, yes, to Councillor McCarthy for her report. And she refers to making Newcastle digital by design, and in her remarks too. When it was first launched, I recall the policy was to be digital by choice. When did this change of emphasis occur? The complaints I've had from residents about the lack of response to emails and the time taken waiting for response on the telephone when they're unable, unwilling or unequipped to email indicate the council is not in many ways improving experiences for customers and people in the city. And as she observed a few moments ago, the rehearsal for this meeting shows how people struggle with technology. Her colleague commented a couple of years back that EnviroCall is not fit for purpose in dealing with local people. Does she think it is now? She also states that one of the objectives in supporting digital growth and innovation in Newcastle. How much of the work on digital initiatives for the council has been done by local businesses, and how much money has been injected into the local economy as a result? And of course, part of what we're doing here, I think, was work done by Newcastle University. Deputy Leader also mentioned, both verbally and written, the January visit of the French ambassador to Newcastle. I'm delighted that the tireless and pioneering work of my friend, the late French Consul in Newcastle, Dr. Andrew Robinson, continues to yield fruit. What plans does the council have to build upon the advantages to us of the local core of consuls, especially when we're finally cut off from our friends and colleagues in the European Union?
Thank you, Councillor Ashby, and can I remind all councillors, you do have the right to ask a question, and please keep it to that. Councillor Frew.
Thank you, Deputy Lord Mayor. I want to agree with the comment about how important the last few months has shown being on the leading edge of the digital economy is. In particular, how data-driven tools like How Busy is Toon have been, and it'll be interesting to see where those go post-COVID. I just want to pick up on our commitment to Gigabit City. I really want to applaud it. I think we should be ambitious for residents and businesses in the city. And I hope this gets cable companies to pull their finger out in my ward, where there are large sections that are still not fibre to premises. And large areas nearby that are, so going forward with that, how as a council, are we going to hold the government to account on promises which they keep making about going full fibre and then keep watering them down over the years?
Thank you, Councillor. Can I call on Councillor Ferguson, please?
Thank you, Deputy Lord Mayor. Can I ask Councillor McCarthy, just in the report, the spending review was mentioned as having been delayed, but we know now that that it's sort of back on. And I'd just like to understand a little bit more about what she has been doing to put forward the council's own position as far as the spending review is concerned, and what kind of requests and positions we're putting forward in terms of what we want to see that spending review do for local government and for Newcastle City Council.
Thank you. And Councillor Hazel Stevenson.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, Deputy Lord Mayor, I do beg your pardon. My question is that our active inclusion partnership supports residents on the impact of this government's welfare reforms, navigating the benefit system and all its dire implications. Never has this been more necessary than now. I would like to ask the Deputy Leader if she could say a little about the work that they've been doing during this pandemic period, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hall, Phil Hall.
Thank you, Sheriff. COVID-19 has created a potentially permanent change to the demand for office accommodation, and accelerated the switch from high street shopping to online. As rental from both these sectors and the associated parking are key income streams for the council, what contingency plans are in place to prevent or replace any of this lost revenue?
Thank you. Can I call on Councillor Anne Schofield?
Thank you, Deputy Lord Mayor. I'd first like to echo Councillor McCarthy's thanks to officers within the Civic Centre and also across the different sectors for doing everything that they have to keep the city safe and well, and also to keep things on track. We've got some credible projects that could have gone under and haven't because of the work of those officers. So my question is, Councillor McCarthy, and thank you very much for the report, on the community-led local development project, to which you've given great support. As you know, this is led by community representatives, and which has been very important to it, what it's about. And it was doing so well to increase enterprises and businesses through funding to them in areas that have not had opportunities to develop before it began. But two things are of great concern for the future of the project. First of all, Brexit, which, because this is a European funded project, is now at risk. And second, as we've all been talking about, the impact of COVID on the ability of groups and individuals to start and sustain the initiatives that are so greatly needed in our areas where people are suffering greatly from unemployment and poverty. So my question to you is, how do you see us taking this forward through your support in your portfolio under these constraints? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Schofield. And finally, Councillor Wendy Taylor, please.
Thank you, Sheriff. Councillor McCarthy, my questions relate to your section on human resources. You've talked about providing guidance to increase recruitment and retention of social workers. It's obviously been a very difficult time for social workers over the last few months, and I was wondering what was happening there. And similarly, you talked about working with residential staff to try and help services for young people on the edge of care. And again, they must have been at increased risk during the last 6 months. And I just wanted to know if you had any update on what's been happening there.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. That concludes the questions. Councillor McCarthy, if you would like to respond to some of those questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sheriff, and thank you all for your questions. I'll try and rattle through them as quickly as possible. Councillor Durrant asked about the Newcastle Fund and our work on social value. We have, I'm very happy, Deputy Lord Mayor, to share the report that we pulled together from last year's outcomes using Newcastle Fund. And I think it demonstrates how it's focused in the most deprived areas of the city. And we have tried to use that fund to make a significant contribution to the sector across the city. And of course, that works in the most deprived communities. All of the evidence that we've seen, I think, related to the Newcastle Fund demonstrates that it's focused in the most deprived communities. And I think in COVID, I think what we've done is make sure that those organisations who were funded through the Newcastle Fund had a little bit more flexibility than we would normally give. So we didn't hold them to do what they'd originally set out, but we allowed them flexibility because clearly they needed to do what was important in their local communities and make sure that their organisations continued to work. So I think what we were trying to do was free them up to do what was needed in the local communities. I think the work we've done, Deputy Lord Mayor, on social value is really, really important, and I would encourage colleagues across the council to have a look at the outcomes from that. I might not get, Deputy Lord Mayor, all of Councillor Ashby's question. Newcastle has gone digital by choice, and partly that is a response to the recent health crisis. I think we've had to do that because we've all had to learn how to use our resources at home more effectively. And I don't know the details about complaints about phone calls into the council. So, you know, I'm perfectly happy to look at that. But as far as I know, EnviroCall continues to do really good work. One of the challenges about that, of course, is the staffing, which has clearly been a challenge under austerity because we've had to shrink the council quite considerably over the last few years. So it may be viewed by Councillor Ashby as not fit for purpose, but I think the staff team who are delivering those services are doing their very best in the circumstances. The January visit by the French ambassador, you know, yes, I think it was a very helpful visit. I think it's really useful that we maintain our links with Europe, partly because I want us to be an outward-looking international city, and not, you know, not the way some people in government perceive us as being, you know, retreating behind our borders, Deputy Lord Mayor. So I think it's really, really important. And I think Councillor Ashby asked about digital and the amount of resource that we have had to invest in that to make sure that services can continue to run has been quite significant, and it might be in my next year's report we can give an update on that to show you know, what we have tried to do to make sure that services continue through these very difficult times. Deputy Lord Mayor, Councillor Frew asked me about the importance of the digital economy. How Busy is Toon is a fantastic initiative that was about making sure that people visiting the city felt safe in order to do that. And it's a website, so I appreciate some colleagues won't be able to use that. But the more that we can do to support people to go digital, you know, with easy access on a smartphone, the better it is. We were given £70,000 to invest in that because it was seen to be really helpful. And I think, Deputy Lord Mayor, one of the important aspects of this work is that it's about working in partnership with others. And so we work with the university and other colleagues to make sure that the information is as up to date as possible. Councillor Frew asked about the rollout of full fibre across the city. So some of us are benefiting, some of us might even have the works outside our front doors at the moment, but we have got 3 companies at the moment who are working on fibre rollout across the city. So we have City Fibre, who've been here the longest, but BT and Virgin are also wanting to invest in our city, which is really helpful given our move to more digital work. So as an example, when we were last looking at this, we expected the City Fibre work to be available to 5,400 properties. By the end of this year, we'll have over 10,000 properties with better quality fibre right to their door. So I think that is really, really helpful. I think, Sheriff, one of the things that is quite helpful in all of this, so I'm not sure how many wards have been involved in this, but each ward will get an update from the communities team about the investment in their local areas. Now, clearly this will take 3 or 4 years to complete, but I think it's really important that we understand where that investment is, and you know, when colleagues' wards are being considered as part of that programme. So I think we'll try and get an update, Deputy Lord Mayor, to make sure colleagues know about that. Councillor Ferguson asks me about the delayed spending review. It is quite challenging, of course, because obviously our focus over the last few months has been on keeping people safe in our city. So we've clearly invested much more time in making sure our city centre is safe and that people can move around safely. You know, I think we will submit responses to the comprehensive spending review. We're already doing that, and we are hopeful of a long-term significant investment, you know, rather than austerity. The Prime Minister talks about austerity being over. Let's hope that that is true, but we look forward to better outcomes. And I think We'll have to wait to see, Sheriff, about when that outcome will come, but will be sometime in the autumn. Councillor Stevenson asked me about the active inclusion work and welfare reforms. I agree, absolutely agree with her that the welfare reform teams have worked really, really hard throughout this pandemic so far and continue to do so. They obviously had to move everything online, which is a challenge, I understand, for some communities. But actually, I guess this relates to Councillor Durrett's question to me as well, because actually local community organisations who are supported through Newcastle Fund can help local communities where they exist. If they've carried on running through that time, then we can make sure that they've got the best access to that. It's been really, really important through the pandemic to keep that support available for residents across the city. And of course, we know that the government gave an immediate increase to universal credit, and that had to all be managed and supported through the council. So I think our active inclusion work is really good. We've also, of course, got really positive work underway with partners across the city. And so it isn't just the council doing that, but we work very closely with other partners. But the active inclusion team, have continued to work from home. We're doing as much as we can to promote the support that's available and make sure people can exist well. It worries me, and I know it will with Councillor Stevenson as well, when we read about asylum seekers who are unable to look after themselves and actually tragically die with their child in the same room. I mean, I think things like that are just awful. So we have continued to do our very best to support people across the city. Councillor Hall asked me about COVID changes to office accommodation. Rental is a key income stream, and of course you will have seen from the outturn last year, and we will continue to struggle. Rental spaces are not so much required at the moment because the teams who are working in an office are using less space. There are fewer people in offices, and you do actually need more space to have the right number of people in. Councillor Hall's absolutely right to raise that as a concern. We know the move from the high street to online shopping has made a significant difference in our city. I'm told that we're back up though to almost 80% of previous numbers in the city centre. So clearly not everyone is concerned about the risks of COVID. But I think, Deputy Lord Mayor, we will obviously have to keep monitoring that. That could potentially be a significant problem to us in our budget. So we do obviously need to keep track of that. Councillor Schofield asks me about the community-led local development, which of course, Deputy Lord Mayor, is a significant contribution to the sector. It's our last little bit of funding from Europe, and so we want to get the very best out of that funding. And so, it has, and as Councillor Schofield said, Brexit is on the horizon, and we're not really very sure what the new fund will look like or how much we will get from government. So again, we need to wait for the comprehensive spending review to hear more of that. And we are hoping to hear that as soon as possible in the autumn, Deputy Lord Mayor. It is absolutely true that we want to sustain some of those projects. They offer significant positive support to people who live in our city. And so much of that, and partly, Deputy Lord Mayor, this is about supporting our most deprived areas. And of course, it's also joint work with North Tyneside, because Wallsend and Walker being bang next door to one another, we are working with our colleagues in North Tyneside too. Deputy Lord Mayor, the last question was from Councillor Taylor. Guidance on social workers and residential staff. That we have tried really hard, I think, around social workers, making sure that we are doing our very best. So she will be aware that we had shortages of social workers in children's social care areas only months ago, and we have turned that around, Deputy Lord Mayor. All of that is now in a much better position, and I'm really pleased to update council on that. Residential staff who are involved with those on the edge of care, and of course particularly through this pandemic, I think we are likely to see, when children return to school, we're likely to see more domestic abuse. We've just heard from Kim McGuinness about the importance of that in terms of the work of the police force and the support that we can offer. So we need to make sure that we're working in partnership with our colleagues so that we are fully aware of what that looks like for our city, because we want to provide as much support as possible. So I thank you very much, Sheriff, for those questions. And if there's anything that I've missed, if people drop me an email, I'm very happy to pick those up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Does Council agree to receive the report?
Agreed.
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 Thank you very much. Moving on to item 9B, the leaders' report. Can I call on Councillor Forbes to present his report?
Good evening, Deputy Lord Mayor and colleagues. I've just had a notice up on my screen to say that my Wi-Fi connection is not great quality. So if I start to dip in and out, I apologise. And if somebody could wave, I'll do my best to slow down and repeat points if necessary. Thank you to scrutiny members for a very useful discussion when I presented this report to them a few months ago. And rereading the report ahead of tonight, it's made me realise quite how much progress we've made in supporting our city through the COVID crisis in the last few months. There's no doubt, of course, that the public health crisis has posed some very serious challenges for our communities, our businesses, and our organisations and institutions. But I'm really pleased with the response from people right across our city, whether it's our public health teams working to ensure that people are safe, giving advice and guidance and putting in place a test and trace programme, whether it's our businesses reopening and putting in place the necessary adjustments to keep people safe in our communities, whether it's communities themselves looking out for each other. And I think if there is a real silver lining in the particular COVID cloud that we've seen in Newcastle, it's a reinvigoration and a rejuvenation of that community spirit, which I know our city is well renowned for. We've done a huge amount over the summer to keep people safe, and that's included working with a new national test and trace programme to make sure that we're promoting the test process to as many communities as possible. But we know that there are some communities who aren't yet fully hearing the messages, and it's really important that if we're to avoid a city-wide lockdown or even a localised lockdown, that everybody understands and follows the public health advice, whether that's personal hygiene around hand washing, making sure that if anybody experiences symptoms, they immediately seek a test and self-isolate while they wait for the results of that test, and also cooperate with the test and trace programme to ensure that we can track down the virus and make sure that anybody who is positive can be self-isolated as quickly as possible. That's the way that we'll avoid any lockdowns in the city. And I know that we've had huge cooperation from our communities so far, and I'm immensely grateful for that. The virus, of course, and my report touched on the huge work that we do on the economy. The virus, of course, has had a huge impact on our city's economy. And our approach has been to do everything that we can to protect as much of our economy as possible. We've administered a very significant amount of government grant coming into the city, out to businesses in various grants of one form or another, but we've also campaigned for much greater flexibility, because one of the problems is that with a national scheme, inevitably there are always some organisations and businesses that fall through the cracks. So we've campaigned for that flexibility, pressed for that flexibility, and had some success, and will continue to press for more. Of course, many sectors have been very badly affected in our economy and are still struggling to get back on their feet. I'm particularly thinking here of retail, hospitality, leisure, and our cultural industries in the city. And the impact on culture has been very profound. That's why a few weeks ago I joined with our cultural organisations in writing to government, urging them to be more flexible about the national funding that they made available to support the cultural sector. Their fears are that that money, a significant amount, though it is, will be swallowed up by London-based institutions and the money won't then flow to the regions. It's absolutely essential that that money flows through to support our vital cultural infrastructure here, because our city's rejuvenation and has been based on culture, and it's an absolutely fundamental part of what makes Newcastle. But the crisis, Deputy Lord Mayor, has also thrown up some real issues for how our city responds. I reported at the last meeting that we were having the first meeting of the City Futures Board. This brings together three different things. Firstly, the Health and Wellbeing Board, which has statutory functions around health and social care integration in particular. The Local Outbreak Control Board, which is a new statutory function required of us by government, but also our work on supporting businesses and creating a new economy for our city. And I'm absolutely delighted by the response that we've seen across a whole range of sectors to that sense of vision, purpose, and ambition for the future. The shared values across organisations, I think, show that Newcastle has really come together through this crisis. And I'm very grateful to everybody who plays such an important role in the City Futures Board. But there's no doubt, Deputy Lord Mayor and colleagues, that we're not out of the woods yet. There's a very real fear that we're going to see very significant numbers of a very significant increase in unemployment figures for the city. We've started to see that in some sectors already, with many of the major retailers like Boots and Marks and Spencer's announcing job losses, which have affected people here in Newcastle. But we also know that that's probably just the tip of the iceberg. And as the government refuses to extend the national furlough scheme or even allow it to be tapered and tailored for particular sectors that need additional support, we know that there's a very strong chance that we're going to see a huge increase in unemployment. Those of us that lived in this region throughout the 80s and 90s will know how corrosive that is for our communities and how the intergenerational impact of unemployment creates social scarring, which takes decades to heal. So we must do everything that we can to make sure that we mitigate those potential rises in unemployment. And to do that, we need to be creating a whole new sector and generation of jobs broadly associated with a Green New Deal for the city. One of the documents that I'll be bringing to the Climate Change Committee next week is a net zero action plan, which will set out an ambitious and radical programme of change for Newcastle. And I hope that that could be part of our answer to the economic crisis that our city finds itself in. And we also need action from government, not just to fund the initiatives that we want to put in place as part of that action plan to reduce our carbon footprint and achieve our ambition of being net zero by 2030. But we also need much greater control over the training and skills functions, so that if people are losing their jobs in one part of our economy, we can very quickly move to support them to train to do the jobs that we're creating in another part of our economy. That's the kind of action, the citywide action, concerted effort that will see us through this economic crisis ahead. And I want to say a massive thank you to the residents and communities in Newcastle for your response through this COVID crisis. What we've seen is cooperation and collaboration at its absolute best, whether it's people coming forward to volunteer for the various mutual aid groups or the helpline that we've set up, whether it's people coming out and clapping for carers on a Thursday evening, whether it's people looking out for their neighbours. I think we've seen the very best of our city through these times. We've also seen, I'm sorry to say, the worst of human behaviour with some of the far-right demonstrations that we've seen in our city over the summer. And I say it now, and I hope I speak on behalf of our entire council, when I say right-wing thugs who seek to stir up dissent and sow the seeds of division amongst our communities are never welcome in our city, and we will make sure that you never have the opportunity to put down political roots here. Looking forward, Deputy Lord Mayor, this is a moment of real change for our city. For the first time in my lifetime, we don't have to imagine what a city with less traffic, with cleaner air, and with better air quality could be like, because we've experienced it. We've experienced it for a brief period of time. And I think the experience that people had of our city in those months of lockdown have given us a vision for how our city can be a better city for the future, more pedestrian friendly, better cycling facilities, public transport priorities above private car usage. And I know these are difficult issues, and I know that there are always backlashes from people who don't like change in these areas. But I think for the health and well-being of future generations, this is the time to seize the moment of change for our city and drive that change forward in the way that our city is designed. Because, of course, Newcastle was designed around the motor car, redesigned around the motor car in the 1960s. And we've been living, sadly, with the legacy of that for the last 3 or 4 decades. This is a real opportunity to change that for the better. And I hope that all members will support the changes that we are introducing as a result of the COVID crisis. And as the COVID crisis has accelerated many changes, whether they're retail habits, whether that's ways that we work, whether that's commuting and travelling, whether that's how we use our culture and leisure time, it's also, I think, an opportunity to promote Newcastle as a great place to live. Because if you can run a business from anywhere in the world, why wouldn't you choose Newcastle with its ultra-fast broadband, with its affordable housing, with our excellent schools? This is an amazing place to live. And I think we've got opportunities to promote investment in a new kind of way as a livable, sustainable, green city for the future, which is smart, digitally enabled, with a proud sense of community spirit. These are all things that I think our city has in its favour. And if I can finish, Deputy Lord Mayor, by picking up on just a couple of points looking ahead. Firstly, the Police and Crime Commissioner talked about the late night levy. I can just inform members that I did write to the government a few months ago asking for the late night levy, for powers for us to waive the late night levy payments, because we know that many of the businesses which pay that are struggling to reopen, and therefore I felt it was very unfair that they would be subject to a late night levy when they weren't actually generating any income. I've yet to hear back from government on that. And there was a question to the Deputy Leader about the spending review. And it's absolutely essential that, firstly, the government understands the scale of the financial crisis that's been caused for local government as a result of the COVID crisis and addresses that in a revenue settlement for local government, which puts us on a sustainable financial footing. Secondly, that they change the way that they do capital investment so that the capital investment that we see from government is the capital investment that we need for our green future, not turning the clock back, but turning the clock forward. And thirdly, that we have a real understanding of the need for investment in a new kind of economy, broadly associated with low carbon, but one which takes people on the journey with us. And I want to see much greater devolution from government to give us the powers to be able to design the economy of the future so that it works for everybody, an inclusive economy where nobody is left behind. I appreciate, Deputy Lord Mayor, that there are many more issues in my report that members may well want to ask questions about, but I felt it was important to take the opportunity tonight to set out the direction of travel that I want to lead our city in for the future, and to make sure that the work that we've done over the summer in pulling together partners, in making sure that we're all pointing in the same direction, is time well spent in investing in a Newcastle that we can all be proud of for decades to come. Thank you, Lord Mayor, Deputy Lord Mayor, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Councillor Forbes. There have been a number of indication councillors wanted to ask questions. Can I remind those individuals before I call them, be specific and choose a question, please? With that, can I call on Councillor Avery? Councillor Avery. Are you here, Councillor Oscar Avery? Okay, I will.
Sorry, Deputy Mayor, I had a brief technical glitch. I'd like to ask the leader what roles our international economic and cultural partnerships have played in helping us during the pandemic, and what role he sees them playing going forward in the recovery. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Cott, Nick Cott. Are you still here, Councillor Cott?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you. Thank you very much, Deputy Lord Mayor. A couple of questions. First of all, given that key funding for improving the lives of residents in the city is now often diverted through the Mayor and the North of Tyne, what role does the Leader of Council now have in improving the lives of residents moving forward in those particular areas? And the second question is about partnership working. You quite rightly drew attention to the partnership working through the City Futures Board. It's a very broad agenda, and I'm just wondering on your thoughts about how that can be delivered. Partnership is one thing, sharing an agenda is one thing, but the delivery is sometimes another thing altogether. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cott. Can I call on Councillor Holland, please? Paula Holland.
Thank you, Deputy Lord Mayor. Yes, my question is after the shambolic exams chaos this year, what could we be doing to support students who are beginning their exam year this term, in light of the fact that they've already missed 3 months of study? What ideas would we have in terms of helping those young people and supporting them? Thank you.
Thank you. And can I call on Councillor Ashby, please? Robin Ashby.
Yes, thank you, Deputy Lord Mayor. My apologies for the grotty background, but my PC just ran out of electricity. I mean, you put more money in the meter. I'd like to thank Councillor Forbes for his report, and in particular, the prominence that he's given to business matters, which are of huge importance to restoring the city's economy and supporting jobs. He mentioned the 50 million-ish government mandatory rates grant, which was distributed at speed, and that's been a tribute to the work of council staff. Some of that money has gone to support struggling businesses, but I'm sure that he'd agree that it's pleasing to see that some has been invested in improvements, often carried out by other local businesses. But when I asked officers, it seemed that despite the best endeavours, the money may have reached only about 3/4 of those eligible. Does any money remain, or had to be returned to the Treasury? And then more credit too to our staff, whose positive approach meant they helped to identify some organisations which are now benefiting from the discretionary grants. And while he shouldn't look a gift horse in the mouth, I do reflect that the money from the North of Tyne Combined Authority is a tiny percentage of that made directly available to this council by the government. What discussions has the leader had with the Mayor about more, and what representations has he made to Treasury about further direct business funding for the city? And I'd like to say, just in his report, the leader flagged over 80 expressions of interest in pavement cafe applications. I sat at one on Ridley Place yesterday as the sun came out. Is it yet known how many more expressions of interest have resulted in similar actions, and what further measures are under consideration to make more applications viable? And will the leader take up with colleagues the application for a gable end mural at Ridley Place looking over John Dobson Street, in which Northumbria University Art School is taking a close interest?
Thank you, Councillor Ashby, for your questions. Can I call on Councillor Higgins? Councillor Higgins, he's possibly not in the meeting. Okay, can we move on to Councillor Kane, Gareth Kane?
Yes, thank you, Sheriff, and thank you, Councillor Forbes, for your report. I'd like to pick up on a couple of the statistics in the climate change section. First of all, on page 38, the claimed cuts in the council's own carbon footprint. I'd like to know how much of that is due to the reduction services, how much of that is due to the decarbonisation of the grid, and finally, how much of it that we can actually claim as a council as active interventions to cut carbon. On the same page, it claims that the Helix energy project will save 30,000 tonnes over 40 years. Is that a cumulative figure? Because if so, it's highly misleading. You know, it works out as 750 tonnes per annum, which is not quite so impressive. So if it's the latter, I think we should be honest about the scale of that improvement. And my third and last question is on the cycling changes. In 2011, we as a council, and many people still on council, voted unanimously for a cycle strategy based on a network of strategic cycle routes around the city with linking routes between them. And that covered the whole city. With the Cycle City Ambition Fund and now the low traffic neighbourhoods, so far, most of the interventions seem to have been in a small number of affluent neighbourhoods. And I would like to encourage Councillor Forbes to reassert commitment to the cycle strategy and make sure the benefits of more cycling, more active travel go across the entire city into our deprived neighbourhoods as well as our more affluent neighbourhoods. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kane. Can I call Councillor Hazel Stevenson, please?
Thank you, Deputy Lord Mayor. I would like to ask the leader, despite the many economic challenges created by the pandemic, investments, development and planning functions have continued in an open and transparent way in Newcastle, unlike other parts of the country. The recent government white paper, Planning for the Future, seeks to centralise this role, taking away local democracy, local knowledge and accountability. I would like to ask, what do you think will be the impact of this? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stevenson. Can we move on to the final question, Councillor Hoddard? Doreen Hoddard, please.
Thank you, Deputy Lord Mayor. I have a couple of questions, Nick. The first one relates to your comments on climate change and then on to housing. Under the current medium-term plan, you talked about £1 million being invested and the planting of 1,000 trees. Now, initially I thought when I read that you'd spent £1 million planting 1,000 trees. However, further reading showed that Trees for Cities gave a £50,000 grant to the city for the planting of just less than 1,000 trees. So what I'd like to know is, what was the rest of the £1 million spent on, or did you spend an additional amount on trees? Because I've been asking about trees, and I've got an email here from Richard Barnes who says, as a result of unplanned cost relating to COVID-19 pandemic, the City Council's budget, including the allocation for tree planting, are currently under review. So that's a question about trees. The other one is about housing, and I want to share with you how pleased we were at the work that the homeless teams, the welfare rights people, housing, etc., the splendid job that they did in rehousing people and getting people off the street. However, in terms of housing, I have read a couple of times bulletins recently which has said that the government has given £24 million to the North of Tyne Combined Authority for building on brownfield sites, yet I have not seen anything anywhere about how much of this is coming to Newcastle and when. So do you know where this 24 million is going to, where it's been allocated? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Haddad. Can I invite Councillor Forbes to respond? Can I remind the Leader of the Council, we've spent quite a bit of time on this agenda item. If I could ask him to answer as many questions as he can, as quickly as he can, please. Thank you.
Hint taken, Deputy Lord Mayor. Councillor Avery asked about the international work, and what I've been seeking to do over the summer is ensure that as the focus inevitably of the crisis has been inwards into our city, that we haven't forgotten to extend the hand of friendship around the world. So that paid off, for example, in the very, very generous donation of 50,000 face masks from Henan province, which I know a number of members were able to benefit from. And those face masks have been mainly distributed within the care system and have supported people to be able to visit loved ones in care homes and in other settings with face masks that they might not otherwise have been able to afford. So that's one example of our international arrangements really paying dividends. Another is I've been sharing in a number of international conferences the experience of dealing with the COVID crisis here in the UK and learning a great deal from other places around the world, which I've been passing on to our various teams of support. So it's important that we do continue to look outwards internationally at a time when our national government seems intent on pulling up the drawbridge and pretending that the rest of the world doesn't exist. The government might pretend that the rest of the world doesn't exist, but we can continue to extend a hand of friendship and show that there is a different kind of Britain than the kind of hard right Tory Brexit Britain which the current government has on display. Councillor Cott asked around a couple of issues around North of Tyne, and of course one of the big benefits of the North of Tyne Combined Authority is it's a skeleton around which much funding can be attracted from government, because that's how they skew the national allocations. So the £24 million for brownfield housing sites is one example of that that Councillor Huddart referred to, and that will enable us over the next 5 years to decontaminate a number of brownfield sites and bring them forward for housing development. And we're still working through the detail of exactly where those sites are, but of course a number of them are in the city, and I guess members will probably be able to guess where they are. And the whole purpose of partnership working, and by the way, Nick, can I just say thank you for your very constructive and positive engagement with the City Futures Board. It's been appreciated and noted by all of the partners that we've got a mature opposition leader who's willing to engage sensibly. What we need to do is create a shared vision and purpose for the future for our city. And that's why the work that the Chief Executive has done on establishing a joint policy unit between our various public sector partners is really important, because that's about sharing resources. And it doesn't really matter exactly what each organisation does, as long as we broadly have the same vision, the same ambition and the same purpose in mind. And that, I think, is what I meant by the City Futures Board, really for the first time in my time as leader of the council, seeing the values that we're promoting as a council really being embedded across a whole range of other organisations too, and having that played back to us. Councillor Holland talked about the exam chaos over the summer. My heart goes out to the kids who've been affected by this crisis. I did hear that Gavin Williamson was awarded a CVE, but it was later downgraded to DUD. It's very clear that we need an independent inquiry into what's gone on over the summer, because this wasn't just a crisis in the making over the summer. Let's not forget, it was a former Education Secretary, Michael Gove, who switched the entire education system to be exam-based and eliminated course-based and eliminated assessments of ability and coursework right the way throughout the year. I think we need to go back to a much more mixed economy of assessment of ability. And that's what the Labour Party is calling for, so that children never again find themselves in the situation that they found themselves in, where their projected grades from their teachers are downgraded by the school that they went to. That, I think, is a kind of discrimination which I am astonished to see the government even consider, let alone for a brief period of time implement. And of course, the other thing that we need to do is ensure that children who are affected by exam results this year and next year have sufficient university places to apply for, because there's no doubt that this hasn't just been a summer of chaos for children. This is going to have long-lasting implications for several years to come in terms of the wider education system. Councillor Ashby asked about various business matters, and of course we've been making representations to the Treasury about much greater flexibility for the use of the money. One of the reasons why we struggled to get all of the money out of the door straight away was because, of course, a number of organisations which were eligible had no bank account details registered with the council, so we had to actively encourage them to apply. But I'm very pleased that we did a very aggressive marketing campaign through the various business representative organisations and have been very successful in getting business grant take-up from a whole range of organisations. And I'm also very pleased to say that I think there's going to be a very significant announcement on the mural that he referred to in his question. And I do hope that we'll be able to announce some real progress on that soon. He touched also on the deregulation of pavement cafes. And this has been one of the government's responses to the COVID crisis, which is one of the reasons why we're creating wider pavements so that people can have outside space for sitting outside various premises and still allow space for pedestrians to walk past in a responsible, socially distanced way. And one of the things that I've been concerned about is that, yes, it's good to see this, but we also don't need the power taken away from us to intervene should there be an outbreak of antisocial behaviour in those areas. We know that this kind of thing can occur from time to time. And so one of the things I lobbied hard over the summer was for the government, in the deregulation of the powers for outside seating areas, not to take away our powers to remove them should antisocial behaviour be prevalent. The other thing that I'm very proud of is that all additional outside seating areas will be smoke-free. This, for me, was a really important point, that we didn't simply outside smoking by having a proportion of the new facilities being smoking facilities. It's absolutely essential that we continue the pressure on tobacco control, and that was one of the things that we very successfully managed to introduce. Councillor Kane asked a number of questions about climate change. Of course, he's asked these questions at Climate Change Committee, so he does know the answers to the questions. He knows that a significant amount of our carbon footprint has come about as the decarbonisation of the grid. But of course, the council's footprint has also been reduced by the refurbishment of the civic centre, bringing it up to date and investing in new technologies, which means that it has much lower emissions and is much more energy efficient. And I have to remind Councillor Kane that he and his party consistently opposed that investment. And where would we be if we hadn't pushed ahead with that? We'd be in a position where we'd have much more emissions than we do now. So perhaps fewer emissions from Councillor Kane, in line with the fewer emissions from the council, would be very welcome in the future. Councillor Stevenson talked about the planning process. And the thing that really, really angers me here is I think we're seeing an all-out assault from the government on the democratic approach that has been embedded in this country and embedded in councils around planning. When planning applications come forward, controversial though they may be, local communities expect the council to hear their voices and for their views to be reflected in consideration by their local planning committee. And the prospect of having that taken away, an untrammelled, unchecked development, permitted development rights for anybody to be able to turn a retail premise or an office premise into residential with no thought for traffic, impact on waste disposal, impact on cycle storage, any of the issues that we know are really important to our residents, I think is a gross dismantling of the safeguards which protect communities against bad development. And I think we need to gear up to really fight this as a council. And it's something that I've been raising nationally over the last week or so to make sure that the LGA also fights this hard. The thing that also saddens me about it, frankly, is that we all know that this is probably about the Tory party getting donations from big developers. And we've seen a terrible example of that in Tower Hamlets, where the Secretary of State appears to have caved in and been bought off for the price of a Vauxhall Corsa. And the local community there missed out on £43 million worth of community infrastructure levy. That is inappropriate, and the Secretary of State needs to be held to account for what I think is a corruption of the planning process under his planning proposals. Councillor Huddart talked about climate change, and I'm very pleased that we have a lot of work going on around housing in the city. And one of the biggest gains that we will achieve over the next few years is retrofitting of existing housing stock. And that's one of the things that will not only help us to reduce our carbon footprint as a city, but will help to create, I think, thousands of new jobs for the future. But on trees, I'm sorry to say that she's barking up the wrong tree if she thinks that we're scaling back on our ambition for tree planting. We've got very ambitious proposals coming forward, more of which in the next few weeks. And I've touched, Deputy Lord Mayor, on the 24 million around housing. Thank you for all of those questions, and I hope I've answered them all fully for you.
Thank you, Councillor Forbes. Does Council agree to receive the report?
Agreed.
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 Thank you.
Agreed.
Thank you. Moving on to item 10, appointments. Are the appointments published in the items circulated at the meeting pack agreed as set out?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Agreed. Agreed.
Thank you. Moving on to item 11.
Agreed.
Thank you. Moving on to item 11, notice of motion, Black Lives Matters. Can I call on Councillor Penny Evans to move this motion, to be seconded by Councillor Stone?
Thank you, Deputy Lord Mayor. On the 23rd of August, Jacob Blake became the victim of systematic racism in the USA. Shot 7 times in the back and left paralysed by people who were paid to protect and uphold the law. Another life and family tragically affected, and now who seek justice. From Martin Brown in 2014 to George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, there have been far too many victims of police brutality. Black lives being murdered, unfairly treated, scared people who are paid to protect them. We stand in solidarity with our Black brothers and sisters, saying enough is enough, and call for justice against the excessive use of force by law enforcement agencies. Black lives matter too. And yes, all lives matter, especially in a pandemic, but at this moment in time, it is clear that many people in the USA around the world undervalue Black lives. To create equality, we need to call this out and acknowledge that white privilege. We need to stand in solidarity, to educate, to shout out, to act with Black lives matter. Institutional or systemic racism refers to the way in which racism is embedded in the fabric of our society and our structures of system, related to education, crime, economic, political, that exist. There's no magic pill to eradicate racism, but we must try. Kamala Harris recently stated, there is no vaccine for racism, we've got to do the work. This starts by acknowledging that systematic racism exists not just in the USA, We have a Home Secretary spouting anti-migrant rhetoric, Prime Minister self-intuition. Currently have a government who has not learned the lessons of the Windrush scandal, who is setting up a new commission rather than adopting the numerous recommendations. The Lammy, Baroness Gregor Smith, still no action. When asked recently, a YouGov poll of Black, Asian and minority ethnic revealed the extent to which prejudice and discrimination is embedded in our society. It found that 2/3 of Black Britons have had a racial slur directly used against them, or had people make assumptions about their behaviour based on their race. 3/4 had been asked where they really from. That such racism still to be found in Britain today, reflection of this.
Councillor Penny Evans, if you could hear us, we are hardly able to hear you. Perhaps if you move closer and have another attempt, if it doesn't improve.
You're not me at all.
Now we can. It's a lot better now. If you want to try now.
Do you want me to start again?
Can you just continue from where you left from?
Okay. So I just said that such racism can be found in Britain today is a reflection of the country's unconfronted imperial past, a history which inevitably shapes our present day. Ethnic and racial inequalities persist in employment, housing and the justice system. Black and Muslim minorities have twice the unemployment rate of their white British peers and are twice as likely to live in overcrowded housing. They are also much more likely to be stopped and searched by the police, and there is a disproportionate number of Black men arrested, charged and convicted of crimes. Ethnic minorities are more likely to be victims of murder, and the rates of prosecution and sentencing for Black people in the criminal justice systems are 3 times higher than white people. 40% of children in prison are Black or ethnic minorities, despite these groups accounting for less than 17% of the entire prison population. Ethnic minorities are more likely to live in poverty, with 35% of them in the position compared to 17% of white people. And Black African women have a mortality rate 4 times higher than white women. And despite making up just 14% of the population of England, Black people are most likely to be diagnosed with COVID, and death rates are highest among Black and Asian ethnic groups. So we can't be complacent. We must challenge the narrative and become aware of our own unconscious bias and call out all forms of prejudice, be that homophobia, transphobia, misogyny, racism, and prejudice against religious and cultural beliefs. Racism or discrimination of any kind has no place in our society. We know that hate crime has increased with the Brexit vote, and we need to ensure that all members of our community can feel safe and valued. So we reaffirm our efforts to tackle this abhorrent problem, to ensure that all people, irrespective of their backgrounds, feel welcome and respected, included here. This motion calls for us to recognise and lobby the government for immediate action on the implementation of the recommendations in the report of the impact of COVID on Black and Asian communities, to listen to the voices of our communities through engagement and celebrations by hearing stories and voices of those with the least power in our society, so we can shape our city together moving forward. And it calls for us to lobby the government to review the school curriculum to include diversity in teaching of children and Black history. So to conclude, and I hope that you did hear some of the first part, that I hope that all members can support this motion.
Thank you. Can I call on Councillor Stone to second the motion?
Second, and reserve the right to speak, Deputy Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Can I call on Councillor Ali, Iram Ali?
Thank you, Deputy Lord Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Penny Evans, for bringing this motion to Council, dealing with an issue which is just so very close to my heart for very obvious reasons. I could talk about this all night. Our PCC, Kim McGuinness, earlier talked about the importance of diversity, and in particular regarding race. It is absolutely necessary to normalise seeing non-white faces in our institutions, and I was happy to learn about some of the progress the police force has made. Some of the progress we've made in this city is that I'm the first black female councillor in Newcastle and now the first black female cabinet in this city. You, Deputy Lord Mayor, I believe are the first black deputy and soon to be the first black Lord Mayor of Newcastle. This is proud history that we have made, but together with Councillor Rahman and Councillor Ali Avery, I hope we will help shape the future, both politically and within the public sector. Moving on to the motion. With COVID being in my portfolio area of public health, I particularly welcome our proposed resolve to lobby government for immediate action to implement the recommendations in the report on the disproportionate impact of this pandemic on Black, Asian and minority ethnic people. Factors including frontline working, low or no employment rates, run-down housing in deprived neighbourhoods, low or no education rates, poor skill sets and various underlying health issues have exacerbated health inequality amongst this particular community. And we all must do what we can to not only reduce this inequality, but fight racial discrimination in all its form. I welcome this motion, Deputy Lord Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I call on Councillor Ali Avery, please?
Thank you, Deputy Lord Mayor. To begin with, if I could congratulate you on being the first Muslim to be chairing the meeting of Newcastle City Council. I'm sure you're an inspiration to many members of BME community in our great city. Newcastle is a city of hope and sanctuary. We have always welcomed people fleeing violence and persecution. Regardless of our party politics, we stand together to challenge all forms of racism. We support the movement to bring justice and equality for Black communities. Anyone who believes in social justice must stand in solidarity with Black communities in the US and around the world. We welcome steps that many organizations in the region, such as Northumbria Police, have taken to root out systematic racism from our institutions. The Black Lives Matter movement will hopefully bring about change, helping us to take another positive step in tackling injustices in our society. Thank you, Sheriff.
Thank you. Can I call on Councillor Anne Schofield, please? Councillor Schofield.
Yes, sorry, I'm having trouble with the internet. Sorry. Thank you, Lord Mayor. Thank you, Lord Sheriff. I'm really very pleased to be speaking to this motion, and also would like to add congratulations to you for chairing this, your first council meeting. Well, despite the global preoccupation with the terrible COVID-19 pandemic, the words Black Lives Matter have echoed loudly in protests across the world. I can't breathe, the last words of the unarmed African-American George Floyd as he was killed beneath the knee of a white police officer in Minneapolis, has become a rallying cry of not only Black Lives Matter for racial justice, but all forms of support for racial justice, and also a request for police reform in the US and across the world. Significantly, the protests are not only demanding an end to racism and the violence against Black people, it has grown into a new transnational anti-racist movement. People from diverse communities have taken to the streets, demanding accountability and long overdue reforms in policing and criminal justice systems right across the world. It's also showing solidarity with other revolutionary struggles of marginalized groups and nations where there is brutal police and military action. It's really important that we have this motion before us this evening, as it's too easy to locate the problem of systematic racism and the use of lethal force in America against Black people and elsewhere. We have no reason to be smug here. In the UK, widespread protests have put into stark relief how entrenched white privilege and power pervades our society and even our city. and how it perpetuates the marginalisation, disadvantage and inequality of so many ethnic minority communities here. A black police chief has warned of the consequences of the humiliation and alienation of stop and search tactics by UK police and the real possibility of US-style police killings unless we bring about change. As councillors, we hear distressing stories daily of discrimination, oppression and inequality through racism. We've all been horrified by the deaths of people such as the 16-year-old Sudanese boy who recently drowned fleeing persecution in search of asylum and protection. Many of us are also appalled by the hostile environment policies against immigrants to this country and the fact that asylum seekers are dying from starvation in the UK and suffering in this city from real destitution forced on them by our vicious and dehumanising refugee and asylum policies. In other words, systematic racism is endemic and it's here. And of course, it intersects in important ways, as has been said earlier, with issues that people face on grounds of their gender, class, disability and religion. If there's to be a meaningful social and political change that eradicates racial injustice and equality, there has to be an understanding by us all that for the victims of racism, as the author Ta-Nehisi Coates has said, racism through physical and verbal abuse is a visceral experience. It dislodges brains, blocks airways, rips muscles, extracts organs, cracks bones, breaks teeth. So if we're to have real change, we have to act. If we fail, we will face justified anger and frustration that could boil over into racial and community conflict. That is why this motion is needed and timely. It sets out the steps we can take to identify where we fall short in our behaviour, practices and systems, and how we can tackle all structural discrimination or prejudice, making tackling racism our immediate priority. The description by Frederick Douglass, who famously lived in Newcastle, of his life in slavery indicate the need that we should have for courage and clarity of vision is required to bring about the change that will narrow the gap between the promise of our ideals as councillors and the racist reality that so many people face in our constituencies. Please support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Schofield. Can I invite Councillor Ashby, please?
Thank you, Deputy Lord Mayor. Black Lives Matter in Newcastle now, as they always have. The city's track record is extraordinary and should be celebrated. Only 1 year after the American Declaration of Independence, escaped slave Olaudah Equino spoke in Newcastle. At the same time, Bill Richmond arrived here, was taught to read and write courtesy of the Duke of Northumberland, and then went on to become a professional boxer of national reputation, arguably our first Geordie sporting hero. The Northumbrian second Earl Grey was Prime Minister when slavery in the British Empire was abolished, only 3 days before the veteran campaigner William Wilberforce died, 20 years before the Americans fought their bloodiest war ever and abolished it at last. Escaped slave Frederick Douglass visited Newcastle to speak in 1846, and 2 Quaker ladies raised the then large sum of £150 to buy his freedom. I landed on your shores a slave and came back a free man, as he later wrote. He's one of the frequent speakers invited by the Gateshead and Newcastle Anti-Slavery Society and saw education as one of the keenest weapons in the armoury of improvement. In 1853, William Wells Brown, who'd been a slave in the US, visited Newcastle and remarked on the kindness of the Geordies he met here, saying, "In no place in the United Kingdom has the American slave warmer friends than in Newcastle." Dr. Martin Luther King received only 1 honorary degree in the UK from the University of Newcastle. History is all very well, but what of today? Newcastle is a city of sanctuary, reaching out to those fleeing oppression. But this council had to pass a motion pointing out that slavery in a modern garb still exists, and a gang was jailed in 2018 for trafficking. Most troubling are the racially motivating attacks that are still happening, like the stones and insults thrown at one of my constituents and his 6-month-old child. This is loathsome and completely unacceptable, as many people posted on social media. There's much work still to be done. This requires not just protests, certainly not confrontations at the monument to the Great Reform Act, but dedication to the proposition, to paraphrase Abraham Lincoln, that all people are created equal, and to make that assertion not just rhetoric, but a reality in the everyday life of our community, common citizenship, and commitment to the collective interest. In reconsidering the past, we also have the chance to think about the future. I'd like to make two simple positive suggestions. We rename Douglas Way with one S at Eldon Square as Douglas Way with two S's. And we should find sufficient space on the outside of a public building, such as the blank wall of the Lang Art Gallery opposite the Central Library, for a mural to celebrate 2.5 centuries of Northeastern commitment to the sentiments behind this motion. Deputy Lord Mayor, I'm pleased to support it.
Thank you. Can I call on Councillor Kilgour, please?
Thank you, Deputy Lord Mayor. As the motion rightly states, Newcastle has been welcoming people seeking sanctuary for many years. People seeking asylum have no choice where in the UK they're dispersed to, but we have a choice about how we treat people seeking asylum in our city or who settle here to study or work. As a city, we are committed to doing what we can to welcoming those seeking sanctuary to help rebuild their lives, and we're proud to be considered a place of safety where all our residents can feel safe, welcome and valued. It's all the more abhorrent then to see far-right activists filming themselves harassing asylum seekers outside their accommodation in Newcastle and trying to sow the seeds of fear and exploiting perceived differences. Let's be absolutely clear here, their racist hate speech has no place in our city. Deputy Lord Mayor, just as women's suffrage needed male supporters and the LGBT+ movement needs straight allies, so too the Black Lives Matter movement needs white voices. Not being racist isn't enough. We all need to be anti-racist, challenging racism wherever we see it, be that from individuals and in our communities, or be it institutional and systematic racism. And so, Deputy Lord Mayor, we need to stand together in solidarity with our Black brothers and sisters, learn from their experiences, listen to their voices, and fight as one for racial equality and social and criminal justice. Thank you, Deputy Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Can I call on Councillor Hall, please? Phil Hall.
Thank you, Deputy Lord Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Penny Evans, for bringing this motion and the cross-party engagement that went into it. The actions of police and politicians in America, driven by a culture of entitlement, white privilege and institutional racism, are utterly disgraceful and a stain on the moral fibre of humanity. Admittedly, I am undeniably a beneficiary of that same system of white privilege and doubly fortunate to not live in a country where half the population have guns and where it takes milliseconds for a regular police interaction to turn into a violent and unjustifiable murder. White people the world over have unwittingly allowed institutional racism to continue, and we must all now stand up and be counted in this fight. We need to reach out and listen to the experiences of communities that institutional racism suppresses. And as such, I ask the Cabinet to take very seriously the request in the motion to set up a local forum of community and institutional leaders. This forum has the potential to go beyond submitting evidence to an inquiry and also generate its own reports and actions for us as a council, for the police, the NHS and all local institutions, ensuring we understand the diverse experiences of our citizens, however difficult or uncomfortable it may be. Whatever our background, we will all benefit from hearing those stories and taking responsibility and acting upon them. In doing so, we as institutional leaders can guarantee we are doing everything we possibly can to end racism wherever it takes root. I wholeheartedly support the motion and hope all of the councillors will do so as well.
Thank you, Councillor Hall. I will allow another speaker who indicated wishing to speak, Councillor Nigel Todd. Councillor Todd, are you still in the meeting? Okay, we might have lost Councillor Todd. Can I call on Councillor Stone?
I'm here.
Okay, back to Councillor Todd.
Thanks very much, and how good it is to see you in the chair for this meeting, Deputy Lord Mayor, especially for this motion. I'm interested, I guess, in the historical references within the motion, because history does shape a lot of our identity and how we perceive the world around us. Back in 1987, I wrote an article called Black on Time, which was one of the first insights into a Black presence in the making of Tyneside and its history. It was possible to do that, and it focused on the 1860s, because the local press, particularly the Newcastle Chronicle, which is the forerunner of today's Chronicle, under radical ownership by Joseph Cowen, had a great interest in racial equality at the time, particularly because the American Civil War was in progress, and that became an issue where Tynesiders rallied in huge numbers in favour of Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation. The other thing that emerged in that episode immediately after the American Civil War was a thing called the Jamaica Outrage, a white planter regime under the that ran Jamaica, which is then part of the British Empire, massacred hundreds of Black Jamaicans, many of them former slaves or descendants of former slaves. It was called an outrage because it was outrageous and because there was outrage in Britain, and Newcastle was at the forefront of raising a petition and a demand that the government act to bring justice into that situation. So we have that kind of history. So we also need to remember, I think, that the North East Industrial Revolution had something to do with slavery as well. And as we discovered in John Charlton's excellent book, Hidden Chains, published by the City Libraries, that quite a bit of the proceeds of slavery flowed into the North East through prominent families in the area and helped fund the industrial prosperity that eventually developed. So we have an issue there in terms of where we've come from and our relationship with slavery. So the motion is spot on that Councillor Penny Evans has brought in terms of just rethinking some of the aspects and public statements about our history. I think commemoration and acknowledgement publicly plays a very important part in rebalancing our understanding of our identity and our attitude towards equality, and making equality, as I think Councillor Ali was pointing out, truly comprehensive right across people from all backgrounds. And that context, I think my suggestion would be that we find some way of commemorating and celebrating the commitment to racial equality on Tyneside of Chris Mullard, who was the Newcastle's first community relations officer back in 1969-1970. Some of us had the pleasure of listening to Chris Mullard in 2015 when he came to talk about his life and his time in Newcastle, again at Newcastle City Library. Aren't libraries wonderful that they provide us with these forums for discovering more about ourselves? Chris Mullard had a torrid time in Newcastle. He challenged the racism that dominated the area at the time, and he helped to take it down and begin to dismantle it. And I think perhaps we owe something of a debt to him, and we could do that through some form of commemoration. I don't think there is a plaque to Chris Mullard, but maybe that's something we need to think about. Thank you very much, David Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Todd. Can I call on Councillor Stone, who reserved the right to speak?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Can you hear me, Deputy Lord Mayor? Okay, thank you. I drafted a motion on this topic immediately prior to the planned peaceful protest in Newcastle in June, but sadly we weren't able to debate it at July's meeting. I did table it again for this meeting, but in the interest of cooperation, I agreed to withdraw it to second Councillor Penny Evans' motion, and I'm grateful she's agreed to include the EHRC part of my motion in hers. In seconding the motion, I think to associate our city with the righteous anger expressed at what has happened in the US, at the injustice and indignity of how Black people have been treated by a violent and all too racist law enforcement system. There are those who say all lives matter. Anyone who believes the law should uphold human dignity and treats all human beings equally would agree with that. But there is clearly a grave, acute and disproportionate injustice faced by Black people at the hands of a system that is all too often institutionally racist. People with mental health conditions too are also disproportionately the victims of violence and misuse of force in restraint and detention. Some would say Britain is not the US. The problem is not as acute. Our histories and cultures differ. But there have been on average over 50 deaths a year in the UK involving police over the last 30 years, 17 a year involving persons of colour. Many have involved use of force and restraint. There have been few prosecutions and little justice for many of those who have died in custody. The culture of policing has thankfully seen significant change from the Macpherson report. Macpherson defined institutional racism as the collective failure of an organisation to provide an appropriate and professional service to people because of their colour, culture or ethnic origin. It can be seen or detected in processes, attitudes and behaviour which amount to discrimination through unwitting prejudice, ignorance, thoughtlessness and racist stereotyping which disadvantage minority ethnic people. Many US police forces and officers are still to undergo that transformation of policing that Macpherson has brought about in this country. There is still an undercurrent of racism amongst too many white police officers in the US, not just confined to the Deep South, as shown by the recent Floyd case in Minnesota or the Blake case in Wisconsin. But it's difficult to challenge power when the incumbent president courts nationalism and paramilitaries and deploys force on the streets against peaceful protests, just as tonight a tyrant is doing the same thing against peaceful protesters for democracy in Belarus. The events in the US have provoked righteous anger across the world and a wave of solidarity and support for the Black Lives Matter peaceful protests in our city and our country. And we can support that by doing all we can to challenge racial injustice in our society. We can campaign to outlaw Section 60 stop and search powers, which disproportionately affect BME people and undermine community trust in police. Black people are 50 times more likely to be stopped than a white person. We can support an end to the hostile environment and justice for the victims of the Windrush scandal. We can support action to tackle health inequalities like the disproportionate exposure to COVID-19 in the BAME population. And importantly, we can support the AHRC's announcement of an inquiry into long-standing race inequality in the UK. So I'm pleased the motion calls on the council to establish a local hearing in Newcastle to hear evidence from local BME citizens, groups and stakeholders. Perhaps it might consider issues like why less than 1% of judges in our country are Black, African or Caribbean, and why there's never been a Black, African or Caribbean councillor in Tyne and Wear. We do now have a Black MP in Newcastle, and I applaud the efforts made by her and by our city's BME councillors, including you, Deputy Lord Mayor, in showing support for the Black Lives Matter campaign at the Martin Luther King statue on the university campus. Let us heed Reverend King's words there more than half a century ago. Let us work together to speed up the day when the jangling discords of our nation and all the nations of the world are transformed into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood and sisterhood, and justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. Thank you very much, Deputy Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Can I call on Councillor Penny Evans now to reply, please?
I'm just going to make sure I'm a bit closer for you all. Thank you everyone for all your comments. It's clear that here in this chamber, although we're not here tonight, that we all are have a lot in common in that we support this motion and we support Black Lives Matter. It's great that we've got such common purpose and that this is a cross-party motion that seeks support from everybody. I also just want to pay my congratulations as well to Councillor Ali and to yourself, Sheriff, on your position tonight as chair. I hope that everybody will again vote for this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Can I firstly thank Councillor Penny Evans and Councillor Stone for bringing this motion. Can I also thank all those councillors who have contributed to this significant motion tonight. I would like to formally and officially show my support to this motion. Black Lives Matter movement has highlighted the ugly truth of racism that impacts and affects each and every one of us in so many different ways. And I am proud that this council is united in our stance against all forms of racism. Newcastle City Council condemns all forms of racism. We condemn the vicious attack, the criminal offence committed by those entering accommodations, temporarily housing asylum seekers seeking sanctuary, fleeing persecution, war, violence, and victimization in the most strongest of terms. We show our solidarity with BLM and Show Race and the Red Card movements. Our thoughts and prayers are with the family of Mercy Baguma, an asylum seeker who recently was discovered dead because of starvation, and the teenage Sudanese boy who drowned in his attempt to cross the channel in pursuit of safety and sanctuary. Such tragic examples further demonstrate the systemic racism that exists. Newcastle City Council stands in solidarity with Black, Asian, minority ethnic communities across the world in our fight for justice in the face of racism in all its forms. Does Council agree with this motion?
Agreed.
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 Thank you. Moving on.
Agreed.
Thank you. Moving on to item 12, notice of motion, mental health. Can I call Councillor Taylor to put this motion to be seconded by Councillor Avery?
Thank you, Sheriff. There's no doubt that the COVID-19 epidemic has had a serious detrimental effects on mental health. Figures from the ONS have exposed the enormous mental health impact of the COVID-19 crisis and show that in the Northeast, an estimated 83.4% of adults have reported feeling stressed, anxious or worried about the future, or that their mental health has become worse since April. Being isolated and in lockdown has badly affected those residents who already had mental health problems, such as anxiety, depression, obsessive compulsive behavior, or agoraphobia. But detrimental mental health impacts have also affected many bereaved families whose lives will never be the same again. Those in isolation, those in recovery, and those facing new financial strain due to reduced income or loss of work. The link between poverty and mental health has been recognised for many years, and we know that in general, people living in financial hardship are at increased risk of mental health problems and lower mental well-being. And it's clear that people in the lowest socioeconomic groups have worse mental health, so the current crisis is likely to exacerbate social inequality. I have spoken to several residents in my ward whose husbands have died in the last few months. Although most of those deaths were not from COVID, women are having to cope with losing their long-term partner without the support of family and friends, not being able to hold a normal funeral, and having to live alone, sometimes for the first time in their lives. I found it heartbreaking. And many young people are also facing mental health problems for the first time, and we know that what happens now could have a lasting impact on their mental health for years to come. The stress could be due to traumatic experiences at home, the pressure of isolation, a breakdown in their support, or the loss of certainty about their future education and job prospects. As a doctor, I'm also very concerned about the effect of the pandemic on health and care workers who've worked above and beyond to tackle coronavirus. We've been lucky in Newcastle, but in some parts of the country, they have had to care for friends and colleagues and then cope with their deaths. Even before the current crisis, health and care staff were already under pressure and overstretched, with an ever-increasing demand for care. Now experts are warning of high rates of post-traumatic stress disorder. The mental health impacts for these staff will last a lifetime, and we must ensure health and care workers are supported throughout this crisis and beyond. As has already been mentioned, we've also seen a rise in domestic violence due to lockdown and isolation. Being unable to leave your home for several months can only make difficult relationships even worse. And many people who have been self-isolating for months may find it very stressful and traumatic trying to leave their home and resume their normal activities. They will also need support. Many NHS services have been put on hold to allow staff to concentrate on tackling the epidemic, and this will include mental health services. We now need to make sure that people who have had to wait to get the support they need are now seen quickly and given rapid access to treatment. So the City Council needs to call on the government to act now to ensure people can access vital mental health support, and that local authorities and NHS trusts have the funding they need to deliver that support now and in the long term. This must include better funded, clearly signposted mental health support for every single community to reach those who are isolated or in hard to reach groups. We also need extra help for schools and professionals to support young people with their mental health during and after the pandemic, and a commitment to introducing additional support for young people's mental health beyond the pandemic to tackle the anticipated rise in mental health needs. There's also more the Council can do, making sure everyone has access to good quality open space near their home, supporting volunteers such as the befriending services who have done so much to help in the last 6 months, and organisations like my local church who want to set up support groups and be a place of welcome, encouraging schools to invest in resources to help to give children more self-confidence and resilience, and working with the mental health trust and voluntary sector to maximise support for vulnerable residents. The Council should also work with health and care providers and our own staff to make sure high quality mental health support is available and easily accessed for all workers. Sheriff Liberal Democrats have long called for mental health and physical health to have full parity. At this time of national crisis, both local and central government need to make sure they are doing everything possible to give mental health services the priority and resources that are so desperately needed. Please support this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Can I call on Councillor Avery?
I'll second this motion, Sheriff, and if I could reserve the right to speak, please.
Thank you. We do believe there is an amendment, so can I call on Councillor Ali to move the amendment to be seconded by Councillor Ellis?
Thank you, Deputy Lord Mayor. Councillor Taylor, thank you for bringing the original motion to Council. Mental health is an extremely important area within my portfolio of public health. The amendment adds more context to the motion in that it talks about some of the initiatives taking place in our city. It draws attention to particular areas, including the impact of domestic abuse and the challenges this will bring once our schools reopen, as well as the disproportionate impact on the Black, Asian and minority ethnic community. There is a huge focus on emotional health and well-being across the city, and one of the ways this is being implemented is through the DFE funded programme of social work support in our schools. There is no doubt that many young people have suffered immensely during the recent lockdown, and their education has been affected as a result, which will impact them for years to come. The call on government is absolutely right. Access to mental health support needs to be better funded so that it can be better accessed, and schools are at the heart of the response system in supporting our children and young people in these difficult times. I therefore move the amendment, Deputy Lord Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ali. I am reminded the guillotine has fallen, so we will conclude this item. Can I call on Councillor Ellis, who was to be seconding the amendment? Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Deputy Lord Mayor. Yes, I'm happy to second this amendment. Would you like me to speak on it?
If you wish to.
I would like to, thank you. We are potentially looking at a time bomb here. If action is not taken now to help youngsters whose mental health has or will be impacted by the many and ongoing effects of the COVID-19 crisis, they will carry a monumental burden into their adult lives. Complex and enduring mental health issues often come from childhood experiences that may not have been fully recognised or treated in those early years. It can lead to unstable lives through adulthood with increased chances of substance abuse, homelessness, worklessness, criminality, victimisation, and shockingly with some severe mental illnesses, a life expectancy 20 years less than those without a mental illness. And this is without considering what we as a society will lose. We will lose those brilliant minds as they're sidelined, that vibrant energy as it's drained, and much of the active, positive contribution that all young people should be able to make as they grow. The experiences a person has in childhood sets them on the path that will lead them through their lives. We could see this as a matter of luck. After all, a child cannot elect the times they're born into, the communities they grow in, and the family stresses and strains they're subject to. But if government action is not taken to fund additional necessary services and expand current services to cope with the anticipated mental health crisis, if it does not allow for the resources required to adapt to growing and changing needs, then rather than view this as luck, we should recognise it as neglect, a negation of duty to our young citizens. So I second this call for the government to act now and supply the funding and support that is sorely needed. Thank you, Deputy Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. Councillor Taylor, you have indicated on suspension of standing orders.
Yes, under Standing Order 27, I'd like to propose that Council suspend standing orders to allow us to debate the rest of these important motions.
Okay, is this agreed?
No.
No.
Yes.
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 No.
Yes.
No.
Councillor,
Yes.
do you have a seconder to your?
Yes.
I think I heard a yes from someone. Who was
Yes,
that?
Councillor Ashby, yeah.
Okay, thank
Yes.
you. That means we will have a vote. We will have a vote. We'll need a vote on this, so get on your devices, please.
But that wasn't his whole career. What I'd like to show you is some pieces that came later in his life that really explored his Czech roots and his Czech heritage. Much of the 20th century were not so well. This painting here is something that Alphonse painted in 1918. It's called France Embracing Bohemia. And this is the spirit of France giving a kiss of freedom to Bohemia, who has been
Is that everyone voted? The result. The result is no, 39 and yes. So that's clear. So we will move on and complete item 12. Can I call on Councillor Avery, who reserved the right to speak in the initial motion? Yep. Councillor Avery.
Thank you, Sheriff. Mental health is an issue that we should talk about all the time. I am very pleased that Councillor Taylor has put this motion forward. COVID-19 has caused great disruptions within all aspects of our lives. It has disrupted the normal day-to-day routine of most people. This has left many people in difficult situations. Mental health amongst men is an even bigger problem and still very much stigmatized today. Sadly, many men fail to seek help, even at times that their mental health reaches a critical stage. Suicide amongst men is at a 20-year high, which is a very worrying trend. Higher suicide rates amongst men, isolation and alcoholism. These problems have all been exacerbated by COVID-19 pandemic, which makes addressing the funding of mental health provisions an even more pressing matter. The government must recognize that these issues and more needs to be done to highlight the severity of the problem. More funding into mental health programs and support needs to be offered. Suicide is the 10th biggest killer worldwide. It is a silent killer, and it often happens when people least expect it, leaving families and communities devastated. As a local authority, we also need to do more to highlight that people are not alone during these tough times. We must do all we can to reduce the stigma around male mental health and let everyone know it is okay to seek help. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Avek. Can I invite Councillor Taylor to respond?
Thank you, Sheriff. Can I firstly say that I am happy to accept the amendment. I think it is, as discussed, a friendly amendment. I don't want to prolong the meeting. I think we all agree that mental health is such a serious issue that that we do need the funding available to make sure that we can provide all the services that are required. There's a huge amount that can be done. There's lots of volunteers willing to help, and we need to harness all that activity and make sure that we really make Newcastle a centre for good mental health. I'm sure it's possible, and I urge the council to do as much as they can to bring partners together on this issue.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Taylor. So the amendment is agreed as the substantive motion. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
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 Yeah.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Moving on to item 13, notice of motion, apprenticeship and skills. Can I ask the mover and the mover if you wish to deal with this now or defer it to another meeting?
I'd like to defer this to the next meeting, Sheriff. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to item 14, notice of motion on COVID-19 funding crisis. Can I ask the mover, Councillor Forbes, if you would like to deal with this now, or?
Yes, please. If we could just take it tonight, please, Deputy Lord Mayor.
Okay. Yeah. Can I ask if this motion is agreed?
Agreed.
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 Thank you very much. I'm hearing a lot of agreed and in fact on the chat. Thank you. Moving on to item 15, notice of motion on school. Again, can I call and can I ask Councillor Morrissey if you would like to deal with this at this meeting or defer it?
Can we deal with it tonight, please?
Okay. Was it a? Yeah, is it seconded? Is this motion seconded?
Yes, by myself.
Thank you. Is motion agreed? Sorry, I do apologize. I believe there is a amendment. Okay. Can I ask if the amendment is agreed? Sorry, it's yeah, we knew there was going to be some hiccups. Is the amendment it's moved by Councillor Holland, is it?
Yes, I'd like to put forward the amendment, please.
Excellent. Do we have a second?
Yes, I'll second that, Deputy Lord Mayor. Thank you.
Councillor McCarthy. So is the amendment agreed?
Agreed.
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 So the amended motion is agreed. Okay, thank you. Moving on to item 6. Moving on to item 16, notice of motion, extended support for private renters during COVID-19. Can I ask Councillor Hodson if you would like to deal with this tonight's meeting or defer it?
Deal with it tonight, please, Deputy Lord Mayor, and I'd like to formally move the motion.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
I'm happy to second that, Deputy Lord Mayor.
That's Councillor McCarthy.
Deputy Lord Mayor, can I point out that this must have been written before some legal action was taken that actually changes this, and there was a motion yesterday on the table at government which makes this slightly different. It adds things to this motion. It actually makes the wording of this motion legally incorrect.
Where's the lawyer?
Councillor Hoddard, I will seek some advice if you bear with us. Okay, thank you. Thank you for that intervention, Councillor Hoddard. I have taken legal advice and we are happy to proceed with this. Can I ask, does the council agree with this motion? Agreed.
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 Thank you. Moving on to item 7, notice of motion on Hong Kong refugees. Councillor King is to move this motion. Do we have a seconder?
Yes, Councillor Ashby seconds.
Councillor Ashby, thank you. I believe there is a. No. Did you want to deal with this tonight or have this deferred?
I'd like to deal with it tonight, Deputy Lord Mayor, and I accept the amendment as a friendly one. Thank you.
The amendment.
Councillor, you were just breaking there. We couldn't quite make that. Was that you confirming accepting the amendment?
I move the motion and accept the amendment as a friendly one, Lord Mayor, Deputy Lord Mayor.
Thank you very much. Well, that concludes. Oh, sorry, is this agreed?
It is agreed.
Agreed.
Agreed. Yes, agreed.
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 Thank you very much. That finally concludes tonight's meeting. Thank you very much. So the next meeting will be 6 p.m. on Wednesday, the 7th of October, 2020, and will again be virtually with the Lord Mayor back in his chair. Thank you very much. I wish you all good night.
Well done, Deputy Lord
Good
Mayor.
night. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.